Hidden atop a windswept hill in southeastern Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe rises like a whisper from a forgotten world, its enormous T-shaped pillars carved with animals that seem to watch from stone. This is a place that challenges everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization, a site built with precision, artistry and purpose long before cities' writing or metal tools existed. As you follow this journey through the enclosures and carvings, you will uncover mysteries etched into limestone, from enigmatic symbols and human figures to vanished tools and secret alignments that may map both earth and sky. Each discovery at Göbekli Tepe rewrites the story of humanity's earliest ambitions, revealing a culture capable of feats that still baffle modern science, leaving questions that linger beneath the stones and in the spaces between the pillars. The hill that shouldn't exist. For centuries, the hill now called Göbekli Tepe seemed nothing more than a natural rise above the plains of southeastern Turkey. Shepherds from nearby villages grazed their flocks along its slopes, unaware that beneath the dry soil lay a structure older than any pyramid, temple or city humanity had ever built. When a team led by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived in the mid-1990s, they found fragments of carved limestone scattered across the surface, pieces too finely shaped to belong to mere farm walls. What they uncovered in the years that followed would overturn the foundations of human history. The site was not a hill at all, but a mound built by deliberate human effort, layer upon layer, until it concealed an architectural enigma unlike anything the ancient world had known. Beneath meters of compacted earth, immense T-shaped pillars emerged, some standing over 16 feet tall and weighing more than 16 tons. These monoliths were arranged in great stone circles, carefully placed within defined enclosures, each one cut, lifted and balanced by hands that belonged to people who, by every prior measure, should have been incapable of such engineering. The accepted timeline of civilization was shattered the moment the first enclosure was cleared of soil. Radiocarbon dating of the site placed its construction around 9,600 BCE, over 7,000 years before Stonehenge and thousands of years before the Great Pyramids of Giza. This meant Göbekli Tepe was created at the very dawn of the Holocene, when the last ice age had barely receded, and humanity was believed to consist only of small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. No known culture of that age had permanent settlements, organised labour, or agriculture. Yet here stood evidence of advanced planning, stone masonry and symbolic thought that required coordination on a scale unthinkable for nomadic tribes. The question that haunted researchers from the beginning was simple yet impossible. How could people without cities, metal tools, or domesticated beasts construct the first monumental architecture in human history? The limestone pillars were quarried from the bedrock of the hill itself, their extraction points still visible today, marked by half-carved stones abandoned mid-cut. Some were transported over distances of hundreds of meters and set upright in sockets carved into the bedrock floor. Each pillar was positioned with remarkable precision, maintaining balance despite its immense weight. Archaeologists estimated that moving and erecting even a single monolith would have required the coordinated labour of hundreds of people. For a society supposedly without leaders or central organisation, such cooperation defied explanation. The deeper the excavation went, the stranger the evidence became. Each enclosure appeared older than the one above it, implying that the builders had intentionally buried earlier structures before constructing new ones. It was as if the hill itself had grown from a sequence of deliberate entombments, one sacred complex after another, built, sealed, and hidden beneath fresh layers of stone and soil. This act of burial preserved the site in remarkable condition, allowing the lower enclosures to remain intact for 12 millennia. But it also introduced one of Göbekli Tepe's most enduring mysteries. Why would a culture invest unimaginable labour to construct something so immense, only to bury it soon after completion? No domestic remains were ever discovered among the ruins, no houses, hearths, or signs of daily life. The site bore no evidence of habitation, only ritual. The absence of tools, pottery, and refuse suggested that people came here not to live but to gather for reasons that transcended survival. Stone troughs, carved basins, and primitive grinding stones hinted at large communal feasts. Archaeologists found animal bones from gazelles, aurochs, and wild boar in great numbers, possibly remnants of offerings or ritual banquets. Whatever happened on that hill, it was not a random gathering. It was a ceremony on a monumental scale. The carvings on the pillars revealed yet another layer of mystery. Every stone was alive with imagery. Cranes with outstretched wings, leaping lions, serpents coiling upward, and foxes moving in deliberate patterns. Many pillars bore abstract symbols, H-shapes, crescents, and stylized human limbs that seemed to encode meaning long forgotten. On some, the forms of hands and belts carved into the stone gave the impression of humanoid figures, as if the pillars themselves were guardians or ancestral beings. These carvings were not mere decoration. They were language in stone, composed by a people who had not yet developed writing but possessed a complex visual vocabulary that linked their world to forces beyond it. The more scholars studied Göbekli Tepe, the more it appeared to rewrite the very order of human development. Conventional history held that religion and monumental architecture emerged only after agriculture, once people settled, farmed, and organized into permanent societies. But here stood a temple complex thousands of years older than farming, suggesting the opposite, that spirituality and shared ritual may have inspired people to unite and build long before the first seeds were planted. In this view, Göbekli Tepe was not the product of civilization, it was its catalyst. Excavations revealed at least 20 separate enclosures across the site, most still buried beneath the artificial mound. The visible portions represent only a fraction of what lies hidden. Ground-penetrating radar suggests the hill conceals even larger, older structures beneath its base. Each enclosure follows a similar pattern, two towering central pillars surrounded by concentric rings of smaller monoliths. Yet the style and iconography vary as if each circle carried a different myth or purpose. The deliberate alignment of some enclosures with celestial points has led researchers to suspect astronomical intent, perhaps a reflection of the night sky as it appeared 12 millennia ago. The site's position atop a limestone ridge overlooking the Harran Plain gives it an almost otherworldly isolation. From its summit, the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction, an ideal vantage for observing the heavens. The builders may have chosen the location for its commanding view, its proximity to ancient water sources, or its geological ease of carving limestone. But none of these practical reasons explains the sheer scale of their ambition. This was not a shelter, nor a fortress. It was a sanctuary built to connect with something vast and unseen. As the years passed and research deepened, even the name Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, took on symbolic weight. It was as though the earth itself had swelled to conceal humanity's first sacred monument, a hidden memory preserved beneath the soil. Every shovel of dust removed from its surface exposes not just carved stone, but the remnants of an idea so advanced it seems to have no predecessor. Yet despite decades of study, the builders remain nameless. No skeletal remains of a known culture have been tied to the site. No inscriptions or traces of language have been discovered. Only the stones speak, and their message is written in silence. What they tried to tell the future, what compelled them to raise the first temples before cities even existed, remains beyond our reach. And so the hill stands, still revealing its secrets one layer at a time, a monument that should never have been possible, reminding us that civilization began far deeper than history dares to remember. The impossible builders. The stones rise like questions carved into the earth, each one demanding to know who dared to lift them. At Göbekli Tepe, colossal T-shaped pillars stand in silent formation, some towering over 16 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. They are arranged with balance and symmetry that defy the crude expectations of the Stone Age, each anchored in sockets precisely cut into the bedrock. No cities surrounded them, no signs of agriculture sustained their makers, yet these stones form a geometry that seems to have emerged from an understanding beyond survival. Their placement reveals intention, calculation, and artistry, qualities that should not have existed in a world still learning to tame fire and stone. Each pillar of limestone bears the mark of deliberate craft, its surface cut clean as if by measured intent. The stone itself, a pale, soft limestone common to the region, fractures easily under pressure, demanding careful shaping to prevent collapse. Yet the builders mastered its behaviour, carving reliefs of animals and symbols that remain crisp after millennia. Archaeologists estimate that the largest pillars weigh between 10 and 20 tons, suggesting that moving them would have required immense coordination. With no wheels, metal chisels, or pulleys, such precision appears almost reckless in its ambition. The question lingers: how could people without even pottery conceive, design, and raise such monumental architecture? In the quarry below the hill, unfinished monoliths lie abandoned mid-extraction, frozen proof of an interrupted task. Tool marks still scar their surfaces, each groove a trace of human persistence against unyielding stone. Some pillars remain attached to the bedrock, suggesting that ancient workers began carving them directly from the earth before detaching and hauling them uphill. These remnants offer rare glimpses into the process, a process that, by all logic, should not have been possible with the available tools. The absence of wheels, sledges, or beasts of burden deepens the enigma. How such immense objects were dragged across the slope without splintering remains unanswered. Their silent forms are testaments to forgotten ingenuity. What is absent from Göbekli Tepe speaks louder than what remains. There are no traces of domestic dwellings, no hearths, no refuse heaps, none of the debris that mark settled life. The site appears purely ceremonial, an organised space created not for shelter, but for something higher. Yet this absence implies the presence of another kind: planning, design, and shared purpose. To shape and align dozens of megaliths required not just labour, but leadership and communication. A civilization without writing or central rule somehow achieved architectural precision, rivaling that of Egypt's later dynasties. The builders may not have had kings, but they clearly had vision. To lift a single pillar would have required the strength and synchronization of hundreds. Archaeologists estimate that each enclosure could have taken years to construct, with workers hauling stones from quarries roughly 100 meters away. Some theories suggest that ropes made of twisted plant fibers or animal sinew were used in conjunction with wooden levers and ramps. Yet experiments attempting to replicate such methods with Stone Age technology often fail. The stones crack, ropes snap, and leverage falters. Even modern teams find the task nearly impossible without machinery. The logistics point to an extraordinary level of planning, one that implies not just muscle but mathematical understanding. Yet the pillars do not lean, crack, or collapse. They balance with an elegance beyond chance. Each stands anchored in sockets carved directly into the limestone bedrock, their weight distributed with remarkable precision. The circles they form appear to have been designed with proportional spacing, creating enclosures that echo cosmic or symbolic geometry. Though no celestial alignments have been definitively proven, the regularity of the site hints at an intuitive grasp of symmetry and balance. The builders were not merely stacking stones, they were constructing meaning and physical form, expressing belief through flawless design. The repetition of form hints at instruction, knowledge shared, remembered, and obeyed. Across multiple enclosures, the same T-shaped pillars appear, some adorned with foxes, vultures, or abstract arms carved along their sides. The proportions rarely vary, suggesting a standardized model that was taught and reproduced. This consistency reveals something profound, an organized transfer of architectural knowledge. Whether through oral tradition, ritual apprenticeship, or collective memory, the builders preserved their methods over generations. Such continuity defies the chaotic image of hunter-gatherers and suggests that structure, both physical and social, already existed long before the first cities. Only stone hammers and flakes remain, too crude for the precision they achieved. Excavations have uncovered thousands of flint tools scattered around the site, used to peck, chip, and polish the limestone. Modern experiments attempting to replicate the carvings show that such tools could work, but only through immense time and patience. A single relief could have taken weeks, perhaps months of continuous labour. This endurance points not just to technical ability, but to a deeper motivation. These were not mere artisans, they were participants in an act of creation that bordered on devotion. Archaeologists have proposed levers, ramps, sledges, yet none fully account for the control these builders displayed. Every modern explanation seems to end in speculation, each leaving gaps as wide as the spaces between the pillars themselves. Some believe wooden scaffolds might have supported the stones as they were raised. Others suggest that the builders relied on sheer manpower, guided by experience and instinct. But no theory explains how such consistency could be achieved across multiple enclosures without written plans. The stones stand as if placed by memory alone, their precision defying reconstruction. No kings, no farmers, no written laws, only faith strong enough to move stone. Evidence of mass feasting, animal bones, drinking vessels and hearths suggests that rituals of gathering bound scattered groups into a single purpose. Göbekli Tepe may have been the axis of belief for nomadic tribes, a sacred site where communities united in shared construction and ceremony. This gathering would have required not coercion but conviction, a collective devotion that transcended survival. The act of building itself may have been the ritual, the proof of faith manifest in stone. The builders returned for centuries, raising new pillars atop the old, as if time itself was their blueprint. Excavations reveal layers of enclosures, one built over another in deliberate succession. Each generation reshaped the site, burying the previous and beginning anew, as if renewal was part of the sacred design. This continuity across ages suggests that Göbekli Tepe was more than a single construction. It was an evolving monument to persistence, memory and belief. Göbekli Tepe suggests that architecture was not born from comfort but from devotion. Long before agriculture and settlement, people gathered not to farm but to build, to shape the landscape into meaning. This realization inverts the accepted story of civilization, implying that spiritual purpose, not material need, drove the first great works of humanity. In that revelation, the stones become something more than ruins. They're a record of intent, a memory written in mass and gravity. And then, without warning, the builders vanished, leaving only stone to remember their order. The site was carefully buried beneath layers of earth, as if sealed for another age to rediscover. Their tools, their plans, their voices, all gone, leaving only silence and structure to testify to their existence. Whatever hands carved the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, they carried a knowledge that the world would forget for thousands of years. The sacred geometry of the forgotten. Patterns emerge where chaos should reign, and the hill begins to whisper in shapes. Beneath layers of limestone dust and ancient fill, the order of Göbekli Tepe slowly reveals itself. Circles nested in circles, symmetry preserved through the weight of 12 millennia. It is a language written not in words but in alignment and proportion, a design too deliberate to be chance. Each enclosure, each silent ring of stone echoes the others, their dimensions varying only slightly, as though planned by minds fluent in balance long before mathematics took form. Each enclosure forms a perfect or near-perfect circle, as if drafted by invisible compasses on ancient stone. Archaeologists measuring the site discovered that the central spaces of enclosures A through D are almost geometrically uniform, their diameters aligning with uncanny precision. The circular walls rise inward toward pairs of T-shaped pillars, each set in sockets that still fit perfectly despite the passage of millennia. No tool marks betray improvisation. No uneven surface suggests error. Whoever arranged these rings did so with the calm accuracy of a system they understood but never recorded. At the heart of every circle, two towering pillars stand like silent equations, defining the sacred center. They are not random features of architecture but deliberate anchors, taller and more refined than all others. Carved from the same limestone bedrock as their surroundings, their placement defines a symmetry that radiates outward through each ring of smaller stones. Some believe these central monoliths represent human figures, stylized deities or ancestors, guarding the axis around which ritual once turned. In their alignment there is intention, in their height, hierarchy. It is as if the builders knew the power of geometry to draw both structure and spirit toward a single point. Angles, distances and ratios appear in patterns that predate the concept of mathematics itself. When surveyors plotted the site, they found proportional consistencies suggesting deliberate planning, specific distances between pillars, predictable gaps between rings, and balanced orientation between enclosures. Each relationship seems to express a ratio, a harmony that governs construction. Though there is no sign of writing or numeric notation, the builders measured through perception and pattern, guided perhaps by memory or ritual repetition. Their geometry was instinctive, not theoretical, yet astonishingly precise. Some believe the stones face the stars, tracing constellations long forgotten. One line of research suggests Enclosure D may align with the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the ancient sky, or that the twin central pillars mirror the celestial twins of Gemini. Others have proposed links to Orion's belt, that eternal triad of stars long associated with birth and death. While consensus remains elusive, the site's subtle astronomical orientation hints at a worldview in which heaven and earth reflected one another. Göbekli Tepe may have been a map of the sky as much as a monument upon the ground. Repetition turns design into memory, as if geometry itself were a sacred script. The same T-shaped pillars appear in every enclosure, their dimensions and arrangement consistent across the complex. This repetition may have served to encode meaning through form, a ritual language conveyed through architecture. The builders seem to understand that to repeat is to remember, and that structure can preserve belief longer than sound or word. Even the sequence of animal carvings arranged symmetrically across stone faces follows this rhythm of deliberate recurrence. Each carving finds its mirror, each creature its counterpart, balanced as if the entire site breathes in symmetry. Predators and prey share equal space upon the stone. Vultures, foxes and serpents appear opposite one another, their postures reflecting dual forces of life and decay. The carvings are not decoration but arrangement, part of a visual equation that extends beyond ornamentation. Some depictions even appear to frame geometric forms, triangles formed by animal limbs, arcs traced by wings and tails. It is a silent visual system merging art with measurement, worship with calculation. Beneath the visible design lies another, subtle alignments that connect enclosures like notes in a silent song. When viewed from above, pathways and outer walls form interlocking geometric relationships, linking separate circles into a larger coherent pattern. Lines drawn through their centres create triangles, parallelograms, and repeating intervals that seem to bind the site as one continuous design. Such complexity implies planning on a scale that defies accident. The builders must have envisioned Göbekli Tepe not as isolated shrines, but as parts of a vast symbolic geometry stretching across the hillside. When sound moves between the pillars, it does not scatter, it resonates. Studies of the site's acoustics reveal that circular walls reflect sound in predictable waves, amplifying voices and percussion toward the central pillars. Ritual chants or drumming could have filled these enclosures with sustained vibration, transforming geometry into sensory experience. Ancient people may have perceived resonance as a divine response, the architecture itself answering their invocations. In Göbekli Tepe, shape and sound merged, binding mathematical order to spiritual experience. And when the builders entombed their masterpiece, they preserved geometry as prayer. Every enclosure was deliberately filled with debris, animal bones, flint fragments and earth, then sealed, layer after layer, as though the act of burial were itself a ritual of completion. This was not abandonment but closure. By burying each circle, they ensured its perfection would endure untouched. The sacred geometry was meant not for perpetual use, but eternal rest, its symmetry protected beneath the soil that would one day conceal it from all memory. To conceive of geometry before writing is to glimpse a form of intelligence we no longer understand. Long before cuneiform or city walls, people of Göbekli Tepe organized themselves around abstract design. They measured, aligned, and planned according to unseen principles, concepts that required imagination, not necessity. This challenges every timeline once believed certain. Civilization may not have taught humanity to think symbolically. Symbolic thought may have given rise to civilization. Geometry in this light was not invention, it was revelation. Whoever drew these lines into stone did so to speak a language that only silence remembers. Across the site, the symmetry still holds, untouched by time's decay, as though the builders expected to be understood not by their descendants, but by the earth itself. The perfection of the layout transcends utility. It feels more like an act of devotion, a message encoded for eternity. Whatever meaning these patterns once held has long escaped translation, but their precision endures, a geometry of faith, left behind by those who sought order in a world still wild and new. Somewhere in those circles lies the first human thought made visible. The map hidden in the stones. No map has ever been found at Göbekli Tepe, yet the stones seem to remember directions, Every pillar, every curve of limestone seems placed with the precision of an unseen hand that once measured not by compass, but by memory. The site's sweeping symmetry feels less like the work of improvisation and more like an effort to encode meaning into space itself, an attempt to translate knowledge of the world into geometry. What survives on this barren hilltop may not simply be a sanctuary, but the oldest surviving attempt to chart both the visible and the invisible realms of existence. When traced from above, the enclosures fall into an arrangement too deliberate to dismiss as chance. Satellite imagery and high-resolution mapping reveal circular precincts arranged along a subtle axis, their spacing and alignment recurring with mathematical rhythm. Archaeologists from the German Archaeological Institute have noted consistent distances between certain enclosures, suggesting an underlying grid or conceptual framework. Though the soil conceals much, the uncovered pattern already hints at design, an architecture that may have once stretched farther than the hill's present boundaries. The circles on the hill mirror the valleys and ridges that stretch beyond its borders. From the highest enclosure, the surrounding Jurmas Mountains form a horizon line that corresponds strikingly with the directionality of the main structures. Some researchers propose that the site's arrangement echoes local topography, a kind of sacred mirroring where the land itself became part of the ritual design. Seen from the right vantage, Göbekli Tepe seems to both emerge from and represent the terrain around it, as though its builders sought to bind the earth and sky into a single decipherable surface. Each enclosure seems to face something, an unseen horizon, a rising light, a memory of direction. The two central T-shaped pillars of each circle consistently orient towards specific bearings, slightly differing from one another yet following a broader east-southeast pattern. Some align with points where the sun would rise during solstices, others towards regions of the night sky long associated with mythic constellations. These variations imply intention, as if each ring were a separate chapter of the same astronomical dialogue, one that required the entire complex to express its full meaning. Some researchers see constellations frozen in stone. Theories by authors such as Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins point to the alignment of certain enclosures with the Cygnus constellation, known in later cultures as the Celestial Swan or Soul's Pathway. Others propose connections to Orion or Taurus, constellations that dominated the Neolithic sky. Whether symbolic or literal, these interpretations converge on a single possibility, that the site was more than ritual. It was an observatory, a map of the heavens built by hands that understood the motion of eternity. One carving in particular, the vulture stone, seems less like art and more like instruction. Known to archaeologists as Pillar 43, this slab bears the image of a vulture, scorpion, and headless figure beneath a series of celestial symbols. Some scholars interpret these as constellations, and the scene as an encoded record of an ancient sky. The vulture, often a symbol of the afterlife, hovers above orbs and animals that could represent stars or planets. To the untrained eye, it is myth-made stone. To the astronomer, it could be a calendar of catastrophe or rebirth. When mapped against the ancient sky, the carvings reveal patterns that echo the heavens above the Neolithic world. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis published findings proposing that the vulture stone recorded a comet impact around 10,900 BCE, an event coinciding with the Younger Dryas cooling. Their work remains debated, yet it underscores an extraordinary truth. The carvings contain structured astronomical data. Whether documenting celestial cycles or commemorating disaster, the stone itself operates as a time capsule, preserving observations beyond the capacity of oral tradition. Yet others suggest the map is not of stars, but of the Earth itself. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led the excavation until his passing in 2014, noted that the site's geographic position places it at the crossroads of early human migration and resource zones. Some theorists propose that the arrangement of enclosures might have represented regions of importance, hunting grounds, water sources, or pilgrimage routes. In this reading, Göbekli Tepe becomes a landscape compressed into sacred geometry, a miniature world set in stone. Perhaps it was not a chart of places, but of ideas, a spiritual cartography of creation and return. The circles could symbolize cycles of existence, birth, death, and the renewal of order. The pillars, with their human-like silhouettes, may represent ancestral guardians watching over each phase of the cosmic journey. In ancient mythology across cultures, circular temples often functioned as diagrams of the universe itself. At Göbekli Tepe, this concept may have taken its earliest and purest form, geometry as a language of the divine. The order in which the enclosures were built may itself be part of the message. Excavations show that older enclosures lie beneath newer ones, suggesting a deliberate sequence of renewal spanning centuries. Each rebuilding may have marked an epoch or ritual cycle, a physical layering of belief and time. Stratigraphic data imply that as generations passed, knowledge was not lost but rewritten, each phase preserving the last like a memory inscribed upon the earth. Göbekli Tepe may have been the first attempt to preserve memory in geometry. Long before writing, humanity sought to externalize thought through form, using placement and proportion as its earliest means of expression. Every enclosure, every symbol appears to serve a mnemonic purpose, a structured reminder of cosmic and earthly order. What began here would one day become the foundation of all maps, calendars, and architecture, the belief that meaning could be measured, drawn, and preserved in stone. If it is a map, it leads not to a destination, but to a question that still has no answer. The stones mark not where the builders went, but what they knew and what they feared might be forgotten. Each carved line and measured distance seems to echo a silent warning that knowledge, once buried, can outlast the memory of those who created it. Hidden among those circles, the first map of the human mind still waits to be read. The burial of a civilization. What archaeologists uncovered was not a ruin, but a deliberate concealment. Beneath a hill that had long appeared to be a natural rise in the Anatolian landscape, they found a sanctuary buried under its own grave. The soil was dense, compact, and oddly uniform, not the scattered debris of collapse, but a purposeful layering. It was as if an entire world had been tucked beneath the ground, preserved by those who once worshipped within it. The realization reshaped every assumption about the site. Göbekli Tepe had not been lost to time, but intentionally hidden from it. Layer upon layer of soil pressed against the stones like a shroud woven by human hands. When researchers began analysing the fill, they discovered a strange mixture of rubble, animal bones, tools, and broken limestone fragments. These materials were not the result of wind or erosion, but were carried there deliberately, poured into the circular enclosures until every carving, every pillar disappeared beneath tons of earth. Soil samples revealed even distribution, a controlled process suggesting not the chaos of abandonment, but the precision of a planned burial. It was not destruction, it was protection. The limestone carvings, shielded from the elements for millennia, retained a freshness that seemed impossible for structures more than 11,000 years old. The crisp edges of foxes, vultures, and serpents remained almost as they were when carved, their survival a direct result of the burial itself. It was as if those who built Göbekli Tepe understood that the only way to preserve their creation was to seal it away. The site endured because it was entombed, and that paradox gave birth to one of archaeology's most profound mysteries. The burial began at the height of its use, not after its fall. Radiocarbon dating places the infilling around 8000 BCE, centuries after the site's construction but long before its natural decay. There are no signs of destruction, no fires, no enemy attack, only the calm method of interment. This timing suggests people who, at the peak of their cultural and spiritual expression, made the conscious decision to bury the heart of their world. No other known Neolithic site exhibits such a deliberate act of closure, making Göbekli Tepe a singular enigma in human prehistory. The filling followed the same care as the carving. Archaeologists observed that each enclosure was buried individually, one after another, often with stones placed to protect carvings before the soil covered them. This order implies a ceremonial logic, a sequence of closures that could have taken years or even generations. The builders had not turned away from their temple in haste. They had performed its burial with reverence, as though the act itself was part of the faith that once inspired its creation. Tools lay among the stones, as if their makers had vanished in the middle of their work. Flint blades, hammerstones, and fragments of carved limestone were found mixed into the fill, frozen as if the builders had completed their last ritual and simply walked away. There is no evidence of violence or interruption. Everything suggests finality, not disaster. The tools of creation became part of the tomb, merging the work and the worker into a single act of closure. After the last stone was covered, the builders vanished from history. Archaeological layers following Göbekli Tepe show new cultures, new ways of life, but no direct descendants of those who built it. The people who once shaped pillars and carved animals left no further monuments, no written records, no legends. Their memory dissolved into silence. What remained was the buried hill, an unmarked archive waiting 10,000 years to be found. One theory holds that the burial marked the end of a sacred covenant. In many later cultures, temples were sealed when divine agreements were fulfilled or revoked, when gods were appeased or abandoned. Göbekli Tepe may have been no different. The careful concealment could signify the closing of a spiritual era, a deliberate end to contact with forces once revered. Archaeologists have noted that similar ritual closures occurred in later Neolithic sanctuaries, suggesting a deep continuity of meaning. When belief transforms, the sacred must be sealed. Another possibility suggests fear, not reverence, drove the burial. Some researchers have speculated that climatic catastrophe or social upheaval forced the builders to protect what they feared would be desecrated or destroyed. Around 8000 BCE, the world was changing rapidly. Forests spreading, animals migrating, and people settling into early farming communities. Perhaps those who once gathered at Göbekli Tepe faced the end of their way of life. To bury their sanctuary was to hide it from a world that no longer understood what it represented. Around the time of its burial, the world was shifting. The Younger Dryas cold period had recently ended, giving way to a warmer and more stable climate. In this new era, humanity began to experiment with agriculture in the nearby Fertile Crescent, and the nomadic traditions of hunter-gatherers began to fade. The people who built Göbekli Tepe stood at the threshold between two worlds, one of wandering spirituality and another of settled survival. The burial may reflect that transition, the symbolic end of an age when gods dwelled openly among the stones. In burying their temple, they may have returned creation to its source. The circular enclosures that once represented cosmic order were filled until they became mounds of earth, erasing the boundary between the sacred and the natural. The act mirrors ancient cosmological cycles found across early mythologies. Death as renewal, descent as continuation. Perhaps to them, the earth itself was divine, and returning stone to soil was a way of restoring balance after centuries of devotion. Perhaps the greatest revelation of Göbekli Tepe lies not in what was built, but in what was buried. The deliberate concealment of a civilization's most sacred monument reveals something both human and eternal, the desire to preserve meaning even as the world changes beyond recognition. The burial may not have been an act of despair, but of foresight, a message sealed in silence, waiting for the right moment in history to be uncovered again. Under the weight of the soil that once concealed it, Göbekli Tepe waits for the moment its makers intended us to discover it. The language of carved creatures. Among the shifting shadows of stone, the creatures emerge as if alive. Lions bare their teeth with an uncanny precision, foxes prowl across pillars, and serpents coil around the edges of ancient reliefs. Each line is cut with care so fine that even the curve of a wing or the tension in a jaw seems deliberate, as though the carvers were not depicting animals but preserving something sacred about their nature. In the half-light of excavation, the carvings seem to breathe, a frozen menagerie guarding meanings that no tongue now speaks. More than 200 animal figures have been uncovered across the site, their presence carefully noted by archaeologists. Each pillar of Göbekli Tepe carries its own arrangement, a kind of sculpted lexicon where vultures, boars, leopards and cranes are placed in calculated order. Many of the reliefs show creatures rarely found together in nature, suggesting they were selected for symbolic reasons. The stone, quarried from the surrounding limestone plateau, bears traces of polishing and correction marks, evidence that the artisans reworked surfaces with the precision of scribes revising a text. These were not decorative carvings. They were statements, perhaps even sentences, meant to be read by eyes that once understood their order. Patterns begin to appear when the carvings are viewed together. Serpents frequently curve beneath vultures. Foxes appear in sequences, often beside the tall T-shaped monoliths that define the site's central circles. When mapped across excavation zones, these repetitions form clusters, as if each enclosure carried a specific theme or message. Researchers have noted that the animals are not scattered at random, but grouped in structured compositions that may represent cosmological layers, the underworld, the living world, and the sky. Some motifs recur so consistently that scholars now speak of a syntax of stone, a phrase that suggests the builders may have been arranging creatures the way others once arranged words. Some scholars suggest the carvings may reflect an early system of communication. Klaus Schmidt, who led the first major excavation of Göbekli Tepe, proposed that the site's animal imagery functioned as a symbolic code for mythic or ritual narratives, possibly connected to the earliest forms of belief. Later researchers built on that theory, arguing that each creature might represent forces of nature, constellations, or even stages of the soul's journey. The so-called vulture stone, with its arrangement of animals beside celestial symbols, has been interpreted as a kind of prehistoric record, an attempt to describe the heavens before writing existed. If true, these carvings might represent humanity's first experiment in permanent communication, a bridge between the spoken and the sacred. Across the world's earliest sacred sites, similar creatures reappear. The leopards and foxes of Göbekli Tepe echo the murals of Çatalhöyük, where painted beasts once guarded domestic shrines. Vultures with outstretched wings dominate Neolithic tombs from Jericho to Malta, their forms carved with a familiarity that transcends geography. Later civilizations, the Sumerians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, would adopt many of these same animals as divine emblems woven into myths of death, fertility, and cosmic renewal. The continuity suggests that these creatures were not mere symbols but messengers in a language carried forward through memory, reshaped but never forgotten. One carving stands apart for its disturbing clarity. It depicts a headless man beside a pair of vultures, one holding a sphere in its talons. Around them, smaller figures appear, scorpions, serpents, and abstract forms whose meanings remain elusive. Some interpret the scene as evidence of sky burial rituals, where vultures consumed the dead so their souls could rise to the heavens. Others see it as an astronomical tableau, the man's loss of head symbolizing a celestial event, perhaps a comet or eclipse, recorded in mythic imagery. Whatever its meaning, the carving feels intentional, even communicative, as if the builders were leaving a message about mortality that words could never contain. If these images form a language, their grammar is written in alignment and silence. Archaeologists studying the spatial layout of pillars found that the animals' orientations correspond to one another in mirrored pairs, a symmetry that suggests relational significance. In some enclosures, foxes consistently face east, while vultures align with the south, as though direction itself played a role in meaning. Statistical analyses of motif placement hint at an underlying structure, an unspoken logic that links one creature to the next. The site's design may therefore represent not just art, but architecture as communication, a system that conveyed stories through geometry and position. Each creature seems carved not as an ornament, but as a statement. The fox, always alert, may have embodied cunning or guardianship. The serpent, ever coiling, might have represented the cycle of life and rebirth. The boar, with its powerful stance, could have stood for endurance or defiance against chaos. None of these interpretations can be proven, yet each adds depth to the mystery. Why these animals, arranged with such care, on pillars that seem to outlast time itself? The artisans who shaped them likely viewed their work as part of a ritual performance, each image imbued with purpose, each figure bound to a cosmological framework known only to the initiated. Over millennia, the code fell silent beneath layers of earth and time. Winds scoured the plateau, rains filled the hollows, and shifting sands buried the stones until their language was lost. When Göbekli Tepe was rediscovered in the 20th century, its carvings appeared like the pages of a vanished script, familiar yet unreadable. The absence of accompanying text leaves only the imagery to speak, but even in silence the carvings seem to vibrate with intent. They whisper of a time when communication transcended speech, when understanding was carved in relief rather than written in lines. Yet the carvings remain untouched and unbroken, still whispering their message to those who listen. The creatures stand frozen in ritual motion, guardians of a code that bridges the earliest human imagination and the oldest stones still standing. To study them is to look into a mirror polished by thousands of forgotten hands, a mirror that reflects not only belief, but the birth of meaning itself. If the carvings were meant to speak, perhaps they were never speaking to us at all. The human figures that weren't gods. Of the countless animals carved in stone, only a small number take human form. Carved deep into the limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe, their scarcity feels intentional, as though humanity itself were an afterthought in a world ruled by beasts. Around them, foxes, vultures and serpents twist in eternal motion, while the human figures remain few, static and strangely reserved. It is as if the builders hesitated to depict their own image, holding back from placing themselves within the same sacred narrative they had given to the creatures that surrounded them. The towering T-shaped monoliths are themselves human in form, though without faces to see or hands to grasp. Arms are faintly etched along the sides, folded across the front where belts and loincloths appear as delicate reliefs worn smooth by time. To stand among them is to sense presence without identity, an assembly of stone beings that witness without eyes and guard without expression. They are both abstract and intimate, bearing the outline of man yet the silence of something beyond him. None of these figures shows expression, and none possess eyes. Their creators had mastered anatomical realism in animal carvings, yet chose anonymity when representing themselves. The decision was not a limitation of skill, but of purpose. In erasing the face, they may have erased individuality itself, leaving behind an image of humanity reduced to essence, neither mortal nor divine, but something suspended between both. Each figure's hands rest upon its abdomen, palms inward, as though concealing rather than revealing. The gesture recurs throughout the site, carved again and again into different pillars as if carrying a meaning too sacred to speak aloud. Some scholars see this pose as protective, guarding the centre of being. Others sense in it a ritual containment, a posture of stillness before transformation. Whatever its origin, it feels less like an act of reverence and more like an act of remembrance. Beyond the monoliths, a few carvings depict smaller, more detailed humans, bent, contorted, or dominated by animals. One relief shows a headless man beneath a vulture's spread wings. Another, a human figure dwarfed by predators that seem to encircle it in ritual procession. These scenes unsettle not by their violence but by their hierarchy, mankind rendered fragile, a fleeting presence beneath the weight of nature's enduring gaze. In these scenes, mankind appears diminished, overshadowed by the creatures that surround it. The human body becomes a minor motif within the greater language of beasts, a reversal of later civilizations that placed gods in human form. Here the message is inverted, the animal reigns supreme, and humanity kneels before it. Such imagery hints at a worldview where the human spirit was still in negotiation with the wild, not yet master over it. Modern research sees in this inversion an echo of an older consciousness, one still bound to the wild. Long before the rise of cities or agriculture, the world was a living mosaic of spirits and forces that demanded humility. To depict an animal was to invoke its power. To depict oneself was to risk exposing the fragile boundary between body and soul. The people of Göbekli Tepe may have believed that to carve the human face too clearly was to reveal something that should remain unseen. The human form at Göbekli Tepe may not represent individuals, but states of becoming. In the stillness of their carved posture lies the suggestion of transformation. Humans dissolving into symbols, intermediaries between flesh and eternity. This may explain why they stand without mouths, eyes or names. They are not portraits of people, but of passage, recording the threshold where human identity yielded to something more enduring than the self. Under magnification, traces of red and black pigment appear like whispers of forgotten colour. Chemical analysis confirms that the pillars were once painted, their blank faces alive with tones that have long faded into the stone. To the ancient builders, these colours may have signified ritual vitality, blood, fire, and night, momentarily giving life to the motionless forms. What remains now are faint stains, fragments of a forgotten ceremony that once transformed the pillars into living effigies. From the dust of excavation rise limestone figures, human in essence, yet fractured beyond recognition. Some bear detailed fingers or torsos, others show torsion in the limbs as if caught mid-motion, but few retain heads. One particularly striking find, a life-size statue with arms pressed to its belly, was discovered near the southern edge of the enclosure, its skull deliberately removed in antiquity. These artifacts suggest that the builders of Göbekli Tepe experimented not only with symbolic pillars, but with fully sculpted human figures, testing the boundary between representation and ritual. Their fragmented survival mirrors the site's greater enigma, a civilization that carved itself into permanence, then carefully erased its own face from history. Elsewhere on the site, human heads vanish from bodies, replaced by vultures, snakes, or open space. Excavations have uncovered skulls with deliberate incisions and traces of plaster, suggesting acts of ritual modification or reburial. To separate the head from the body may have been to release the spirit or to preserve it. Either way, the gesture carried weight beyond death. The silence of the missing faces seems to echo the reverence once shown to the skulls hidden in the earth beneath. It may be that the faceless pillars were never meant as gods at all, but as reflections of those who built them. Each stone body becomes a mirror in which an ancient community glimpses its place in creation, not as rulers, but as witnesses to forces greater than themselves. By stripping the human form of individuality, they may have sought not to elevate man but to dissolve him into the order of things, leaving behind only the outline of what it once meant to exist. What they chose not to carve may speak louder than what they left behind. In the still air of Göbekli Tepe, the eyeless faces seem to stare inward, carrying within their silence a knowledge that words cannot recover, a truth not of the gods, but of those who first learned that to be human was to vanish gently into the stone that remembers everything. Even in stone they refused to show their faces, as if what they feared most was being recognized by time itself. The Comet and the Cataclysm. Deep within Enclosure D, one pillar seems to turn its gaze beyond the horizon. Its surface, now worn by millennia of wind and dust, still holds a composition so deliberate it resists chance. Shapes curve and intertwine across the limestone, a vulture poised above a scorpion, a headless figure beneath the wing, and a disc floating as if suspended in midair. No single image dominates the stone, yet together they suggest intention, an encoded message not of earthbound scenes but of something witnessed in the heavens themselves. Etched upon its face, a scorpion, a vulture, and a headless man form a tableau that defies ordinary interpretation. Archaeologists call it Pillar 43, but many know it by another name, the Vulture Stone. Each carving appears arranged with a geometric care. The scorpion's tail aligns beneath the vulture's wing, and above them, a circle often interpreted as the sun or a celestial body. To the untrained eye, it is art from an age without writing. To those who study ancient skies, it may be something far more deliberate, a record of constellations frozen in time. Astroarchaeologists from the University of Edinburgh proposed that these symbols may record a date, the sky as it appeared 12,000 years ago. In 2017, a peer-reviewed paper suggested that the images correspond to specific constellations, the scorpion as Scorpius, the vulture as Sagittarius, and the circle above them as a comet descending from the Taurid meteor stream. When calibrated through astronomical software, this sky matches the era of 10,950 BCE, the approximate beginning of the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to glacial cold that reshaped life on Earth. Across North America and beyond, layers of blackened soil tell of a sudden and global cooling. In these layers lie microscopic glass beads, melted rock fragments, and elevated levels of platinum, all physical signatures of high-energy impact. Excavations in Greenland ice cores reveal the same chemical fingerprints, a spike of iridium and soot, suggesting vast wildfires. The world that had been warming after the Ice Age plunged back into winter, its megafauna vanishing, its human population scattered. The event's violence left traces in both earth and myth. If the theory holds, the builders of Göbekli Tepe lived in a world still haunted by fire from the heavens. For them, the night sky may not have been a place of calm navigation but of remembered terror. The stories they carved could be echoes of survival, the first attempt to make sense of chaos. Later traditions across continents would recall a similar fear: skies torn open, floods unleashed, and gods of fire descending to punish the proud. In their silent way, these pillars may preserve the earliest version of that universal memory. Rather than words, the people of Göbekli Tepe may have chosen the only language that could outlast them, carved symbols of the sky that changed their world. They left no writing, no spoken record, but in stone they traced the order of stars and the signs of calamity. The circle above the vulture's wing may represent the comet's arrival, while the headless man could signify death or cosmic decapitation. a motif later repeated in Near Eastern myth. What endures is the pattern, the deliberate geometry of warning. Computer models of the site's orientation reveal deliberate alignment toward the constellation Sagittarius, the region from which the torrid stream originates. Though Göbekli Tepe's enclosures vary slightly in angle, their overall configuration suggests celestial intent. One axis aligns precisely with the rising point of the sun at the summer solstice, another with key star clusters visible during the Younger Dryas period. Whether this was meant as an observatory or a memorial, it demonstrates a mind capable of correlating heaven and earth with precision far beyond chance. Skeptics argue that such correlations are a coincidence, the mind's tendency to find patterns in chaos. They warn that retrofitting modern star maps onto ancient art risks seeing meaning where none existed. To them, the carvings are symbolic expressions of spiritual belief, not records of astronomical events. And yet, even cautious researchers acknowledge that the site's builders possessed an awareness of the sky rare for their era. Whether or not they charted a comet, they clearly built in alignment with rhythms larger than their own world. Beneath the soils of Anatolia, traces of microscopic carbon spherules and high-temperature minerals whisper of ancient heat. These materials, impact proxies, have been identified near sites contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, forming part of the growing evidence for a Younger Dryas impact event. Similar deposits found in Syria, Lebanon and Turkey strengthen the case that the catastrophe was not a localized occurrence, but a hemispheric one. If true, the people who raised these pillars did so in a landscape reshaped by cataclysmic fire. If Göbekli Tepe was built in the wake of that cataclysm, then every pillar was a memorial, each carving a verse in the oldest story ever told. The scorpion and vulture, the headless figure, the abstract signs. Together they may form a remembrance of the boundary between worlds, the sky that fell and the earth that endured. In crafting stone to last beyond themselves, these builders may have transformed trauma into architecture, loss into permanence. Every relief was both an act of devotion and survival. When the flames receded and the air cooled, those who endured began to shape the world anew. In the centuries that followed, evidence of settled life appeared in the Fertile Crescent. Grinding stones stored grains and the first steps toward agriculture. Some scholars suggest that necessity drove innovation, that scarcity and memory combined to birth civilization itself. If so, Göbekli Tepe marks the threshold not just between epochs, but between fear and understanding, between the sky's terror and humanity's response to it. Whether by chance or cosmic witness, the stones of Göbekli Tepe preserve a map of the heavens and a wound upon the earth. They stand not as temples of worship, but as instruments of remembrance, coordinates of loss carved in limestone. To gaze upon them is to see the outline of an ancient sky that once burned with falling stars, a story both cosmic and human, written long before the first word was ever spoken. The message they carved was not of gods or beasts, but of the sky itself, remembering the night when the stars fell and the world began again. The lost rituals of the dead. Silence is the first thing that greets those who descend into Göbekli Tepe's buried heart. The air is heavy with the scent of age and dust, as if the earth itself has been holding its breath for thousands of years. The pillars that once reached for the sun now rest under meters of soil entombed with deliberate precision. To uncover them is not to unearth ruins, but to interrupt an act of ritual concealment, a burial not of the dead but of meaning itself. Under a dense shroud of compacted earth and limestone fragments, researchers revealed not decay but a deliberate concealment. The site was not overtaken by time or erosion. It was sealed, intentionally filled in by the very people who built it. Layer after layer of backfill, animal bones, flint tools, shattered limestone, formed a barrier between the living and their sacred creation. Archaeologists found no sign of collapse or abandonment, only a quiet, methodical burial that seemed more like a rite than an act of departure. Each layer seemed arranged with care, as though the act of covering the stones was itself part of a ceremony. It was not random refuse that filled the spaces between the enclosures, but fragments chosen with intent, limestone chips from the pillars, remnants of hunted animals, traces of fire. The precision of this burial speaks of purpose. Whatever these people feared or revered, they chose not to destroy it, but to hide it, encasing the sacred architecture in earth as though preserving it for an age that could understand. Carved upon the monoliths, the images of vultures, headless forms and contorted limbs speak of a fixation with the passage between worlds. The vulture, in ancient symbology, was not a creature of decay but of transformation, one that carried the soul from flesh to sky. At Göbekli Tepe, these birds appear beside headless human figures, floating forms and abstract limbs, suggesting a shared obsession with the moment life becomes spirit. Such imagery was not unique to this site. Similar motifs would later appear in Catalhoyuk and in early Mesopotamian graves, echoing a belief that death was not an end but an exchange. In ancient Near Eastern traditions, vultures often marked the space between the living and the dead. Neolithic cultures practiced excarnation, the ritual defleshing of bodies left in the open for birds to consume, before reburying the cleaned bones. At Göbekli Tepe, researchers found evidence of disarticulated remains, as if the site had been both temple and tomb. The carvings may thus record not deities, but processions of death itself, the sky serving as the first afterlife, the earth as its final seal. The burial's timing aligns curiously with the end of the Younger Dryas, when humanity faced both renewal and extinction. Around 9,600 BCE, the climate shifted abruptly, glaciers melted, and ecosystems changed beyond recognition. Some theorists link the closure of Göbekli Tepe to this transformation, suggesting the builders performed one last rite to mark the passing of an era. In that sense, the burial of the temple might represent the burial of an entire worldview, one that saw spirits in every animal and divinity in every storm. To bury such a monumental site was not merely to abandon it, it was to seal it, to ensure that its power remained contained. The precision of the backfill, the absence of disorder, and the placement of symbolic relics imply intention far beyond practicality. Some archaeologists suggest the act was protective. The builders might have believed the rituals within had achieved their purpose, or that the spirits they invoked required confinement. Others see it as a closing of the human relationship with the unseen, a deliberate retreat from something that had grown too vast to comprehend. Traces of pigment still cling to the crevices of the carvings, faint smudges of red ochre and black charcoal that once painted life upon stone. Chemical analysis revealed microscopic residues, suggesting the site may have been alive with colour before it was buried. Red, associated with blood and rebirth, may have covered the vultures and human figures alike, while black could have marked transitions or endings. The decision to bury such vibrant art beneath pale soil feels almost like an inversion, a return from light to shadow, from creation to silence. Animal remains discovered within the backfill deepen the mystery further. Skulls of wild boar, gazelle and aurochs appear placed with deliberate orientation, sometimes beside fragments of carved limestone or worked flint. These were not mere offerings of sustenance, but symbolic gestures, the remnants of a rite that merged the boundaries between species. In a world where human and animal spirits intermingled freely, death rituals may have sought to ensure that both passed together into the next cycle, bound by the same cosmic order. The orientation of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures adds another layer of meaning. Many align toward celestial markers, the rising of Sirius, the constellation of Orion, or points associated with the solstices. This connection between the architecture of the dead and the map of the heavens suggests that burial was not simply physical, but cosmic. The sealed stones may have been intended as a mirror of the sky above, each pillar a frozen axis of the stars that once guided their ceremonies. To bury it, then, was to extinguish that mirror, to close the gate between worlds. Archaeological evidence hints that the act of sealing the site may have been accompanied by a final ritual fire. Charred bones and ash layers found at the uppermost levels indicate controlled burning before the last infill. Fire, like burial, was a means of transformation, reducing matter to essence, memory to smoke. What began in stone may have ended in flame, the two elements uniting to enclose a secret humanity no longer wished to face. Since that moment, a silence spanning 12,000 years has settled over the place. The earth held what the builders chose to forget, concealing a truth too immense for memory alone. When modern hands uncovered those stones once more, they did not merely excavate a ruin, they reopened a wound in time. What they buried may not have been stone, but a memory humanity was never meant to disturb. The echo chamber of stone. Long before words were carved into stone, sound itself shaped the sacred. Before symbols or scripts, before the measured rhythm of spoken language, there was vibration, the pulse of the earth that humans tried to understand by listening. At Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple, the arrangement of monoliths and the circular geometry suggest that silence was never its natural state. The limestone walls, the enclosed rings, and the hollow hill beneath them together form a chamber that seems designed to hold resonance. The air within those circles feels like it was built not only to be seen, but to be heard. Acoustic studies at Göbekli Tepe reveal a phenomenon both precise and haunting. When researchers tested the site using low-frequency tones, they discovered that some enclosures sustained sound far longer than open-air structures should. Even a soft hum or spoken word travels in a loop, bouncing against the stones with unexpected persistence. Certain tones resonate at measurable frequencies that align with those found in ancient temples thousands of years younger, suggesting a continuity of design that began here at humanity's first sanctuary. Whether by accident or understanding, the builders created spaces where sound lingers, almost as if the stones remember the voices that once filled them. The circular enclosures are not random, they behave like instruments tuned by intention. Each is slightly different in size and depth, altering how air moves and sound rebounds. The limestone, rich in quartz crystals, conducts vibration exceptionally well, allowing tones to travel smoothly along its surface. Archaeologists mapping the chambers have found that certain walls reflect sound more efficiently, creating sweet spots where even the faintest note becomes amplified. It is as though the builders understood that geometry itself could transform breath into presence. Within those rings, a whisper does not vanish, it returns. Imagine a group of voices chanting under the open sky, their tones folding into one another, merging until distinction is lost. To stand at the center of such a space is to hear your own sound come back changed, darker, fuller, alive. It is easy to see how ancient ritual could rely on such effects, for what better proof of the unseen than a sound that answers back? In that echo, they might have heard the voices of ancestors or gods, believing the stones were speaking in return. Carved beasts gaze inward, their mouths open as if frozen in chorus. The lion, the boar, the serpent, all seem caught mid-breath, locked in the perpetual moment before sound becomes roar or hiss. These figures surrounding the inner circle appear positioned not at random but to face inward, toward the center where resonance is strongest. The animals themselves may have symbolized the carriers of sound, the primal forces of warning, song, and invocation. In that sense, Göbekli Tepe was not merely decorated but orchestrated, each figure a silent participant in a ritual of vibration. Modern researchers have replicated these echoes with simple tones, discovering frequencies that linger unnaturally long. In one experiment, a single note at 70 Hz reverberated for several seconds, sustained by the interplay between stone and air. At certain pitches, even footsteps produce subtle oscillations that seem to hum beneath the ground. These are not coincidences. Modern cathedrals built thousands of years later exhibit similar acoustic behavior, proof that Göbekli Tepe's architecture, though Neolithic, already contained the blueprint of sacred resonance. At certain frequencies, sound ceases to be heard, it is felt. Low vibrations penetrate the body, synchronizing with the heartbeat and inducing a sensation of weightless stillness. Neurological studies of rhythm and sound have shown how repetitive chanting can alter brainwave patterns, creating states of trance or heightened awareness. The builders may not have known this in scientific terms, yet they experienced it directly. The site's very design suggests that sound was used to transform consciousness, to move from the ordinary into the sacred. Even the act of carving may have been part of the ritual, each strike of flint echoing through the limestone walls. To shape those towering pillars, workers would have heard a steady rhythm of impact, the ringing of stone upon stone. Archaeologists have noted that the quarry lies nearby, meaning that the sound of creation surrounded the site for years as it was built. The rhythmic pounding could have been a form of worship itself, every blow an invocation, every echo a response. In shaping the stones, they may have believed they were giving them voice. Between these resonances lies a silence that feels deliberate. Some parts of the site produce no echo at all, even when struck directly, a puzzling contrast to the rest. These dead zones, as researchers call them, may have served a separate purpose, The stillness after invocation, the silence where meaning resides. Ancient cultures often treated silence as the counterpart of sound, the sacred pause in which divine presence is felt. At Göbekli Tepe, silence may have been the moment when the world listened back. Seismic readings reveal that the bedrock itself vibrates faintly under certain conditions. Göbekli Tepe stands atop a limestone ridge prone to micro-tremors, subtle shifts of the earth that produce vibrations too small to detect by ear. But in a chamber already tuned to resonance, such tremors would be magnified, felt through the feet, the ribs, the chest. It is possible the builders noticed these movements and saw them as messages from below, the pulse of the earth itself echoing the rhythm of their ceremonies. Sound may have been the first bridge between human and divine. In many ancient cosmologies, creation began not with sight but with sound, the word, the vibration, the note that summoned form from formlessness. Göbekli Tepe may have been humanity's first attempt to make that sound physical, to trap resonance in stone and build a home for the invisible. The people who gathered there might not have worshipped an image or an idol, but the living voice of the world itself. When modern researchers speak within its chambers, their voices return distorted, as if spoken by another age. The echoes seem to twist around the walls, reshaping the tone until it feels no longer human. In that altered sound, it is easy to imagine the voices of those who once stood there, calling out to the void and hearing the void answer back. Some say the echoes that rise from its stones are not returning voices at all, but the last memory of a sound that never truly stopped. The hidden enclosures beneath the earth. In their earliest investigations beneath Göbekli Tepe's circles, archaeologists looked for bedrock or signs of primitive life. Instead, the ground seemed to resist them, not as if hiding something fragile, but as though guarding a deliberate boundary. Each layer removed exposed traces of backfill and debris that had been placed there intentionally, compacted by human hands thousands of years ago. The pattern suggested a purposeful burial, not of bodies, but of entire structures, a monumental act of concealment performed by the very people who built them. Soil surrounding the ancient pillars revealed arrangements that defied natural explanation. Foundation outlines intersected in near-geometric alignment, and the density of packed sediment suggested enclosures larger and more intricate than those already uncovered. Archaeologists realized that what was once thought to be a single monumental site might only represent the visible summit of a vast complex extending downward into the hill. In the silence of the excavation trenches, the air itself seemed to change, as if the earth beneath carried memory in its density. Infrared imaging and ground-penetrating radar began to map what human eyes could not yet see. The scans revealed hollow forms arranged in repeating spirals and concentric rings, reaching several meters below the lowest known enclosures. Some of these voids appeared to be connected by narrow tunnels, their angles too precise for natural erosion. The technology hinted at a hidden architecture, preserved within layers of soil older than agriculture itself. Researchers debated whether these were unfinished enclosures, storage chambers, or ceremonial vaults sealed to prevent their rediscovery. One of the first anomalies detected was a chamber unlike any previously unearthed on the plateau. It appeared to have been carved directly from the bedrock, with walls coated in a fine layer of red ochre. When probes reached its interior, they revealed a perfectly circular space devoid of carvings or ornamentation, only smooth, curved stone and an absence of any debris. To some, it resembled the foundation of a yet-to-be-built enclosure. To others, it seemed more like an intentional void, a negative space preserved for reasons unknown. Closer analysis of the sediment inside suggested something remarkable. Time had not merely buried these spaces, it had preserved them. Samples taken from microlayers of soil revealed no signs of flooding or collapse. The backfill was orderly, almost engineered, as though designed to withstand erosion and the slow compression of centuries. Such deliberate infill required effort and coordination, implying that the builders did not simply abandon Göbekli Tepe. They entombed it carefully, sealing each level before covering it with stone and clay. It was not ruin that buried the site, but ritual intent. Walls of compacted limestone appeared to form spiralling paths, as if designed to lead inward toward a sealed core. Unlike the upright T-shaped pillars above, these walls curved and folded, creating passages that would have guided movement in slow, deliberate procession. Archaeologists noted that the wall's surfaces bore faint marks, almost like tool strokes, that repeated in rhythmic intervals. If the upper enclosures reflected cosmic order through open-air ceremony, these subterranean spirals seem to embody descent, perhaps a symbolic return to origins, or a journey into the womb of the earth itself. Recent core analyses beneath the spiraling foundations uncovered a dense stratum of clay interlaced with crystalline quartz fragments. The combination was unexpected. Quartz is not native to the immediate region and would have required transport from distant riverbeds. Its inclusion seemed deliberate, possibly to stabilize the ground or to harness piezoelectric properties that cause subtle electrical charges when pressure is applied. Geologists noted that in certain conditions, such materials can amplify sound or vibration, creating an unusual resonance within enclosed spaces. Whether this was intentional engineering or a coincidence remains unproven, yet its presence adds another layer of complexity to the enclosure's hidden design. Within these lower corridors, fragments of tools were found that defied the expected context of the Neolithic period. Obsidian blades, sourced from distant volcanic regions, lay beside limestone hammerstones that showed signs of precise percussion. Some fragments appeared deliberately broken and placed, forming small clusters beneath the base of certain walls. The act suggested offering rather than accident, an early form of dedication ceremony that blurred the line between construction and worship. Each fragment, in its quiet placement, seemed to speak of knowledge lost not to time but to deliberate silence. Even more perplexing were the traces of fire, controlled, localized, and somehow ancient beyond the known age of the site. Thin layers of carbonized residue coated sections of the deeper stone, yet showed no evidence of destruction. These were not fires of warmth or cooking, but symbolic flames, perhaps used in ritual purification before the enclosures were sealed. The carbon layers dated millennia before comparable practices elsewhere, hinting at a sophistication that should not have existed so early in human civilization. In the stillness of those buried chambers, the presence of fire felt paradoxical, both sacred and extinguished. Some researchers have proposed that these lower enclosures served not as temples, but as mechanisms of memory. The act of burying an entire monumental complex layer upon layer may have encoded a worldview that saw preservation through concealment. To hide was to honor. To bury was to keep eternal. In this interpretation, Göbekli Tepe was never abandoned. It was completed by disappearance. Its builders may have believed that sacred knowledge could only endure when sealed away from the corruption of the surface world. What they concealed, however, may not have been stone alone. Every attempt to interpret conceals a quiet more profound than the earth beneath it. Even with modern instruments and precise mapping, no excavation has reached the deepest outlines visible on radar. There, beneath meters of unbroken earth, still lie structures untouched since their burial 10,000 years ago. The ground remains undisturbed, not from neglect, but from hesitation. For every layer revealed so far, another waits below, darker and more enigmatic, as if the earth itself remembers something humanity was meant to forget. The last enclosure sleeps beneath untouched stone, anticipating a question the world is not ready to pose. The vanished tools of creation. Only fragments remain where the hands of builders once struck rock. Among the monumental pillars and intricately carved enclosures of Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists uncover traces of labour, but the instruments responsible for such feats have nearly vanished. Stones weighing up to 20 tons stand upright as if by some improbable magic, yet the tools that could have shaped and moved them are absent or minimal, leaving a profound question. How did humans, armed with nothing more than flint and wood, accomplish the impossible? Flint flakes and rudimentary hammerstones hint at effort, but cannot explain the scale of achievement. Excavations have yielded countless chips, cores, and crude implements, yet their simplicity belies the precision evident on the pillars. Each hammerstone or flake could account for minor shaping, but not the meticulous reliefs of predators and abstract symbols, or the perfect levelling of immense circular enclosures. The surviving implements are shadows of what must have existed, whispering of lost skill and vanished knowledge. The limestone pillars bear grooves and cut marks that speak of repeated, precise strikes. Close examination reveals deep scoring along vertical faces, circular depressions at the bases, and finely incised lines decorating T-shaped monoliths Each mark shows intentionality and rhythm, suggesting that the builders understood the properties of limestone better than modern stoneworkers might assume for a pre-agricultural society. Yet no sophisticated chisels, drills, or metal edges have been found. The evidence implies the use of simple but highly controlled percussion techniques, wielded with extraordinary skill. Invisible to most, microscopic remnants in the soil trace a tale long buried. Analysis of residue on some pillars shows microscopic scratches and polished patterns consistent with repeated precise contact, possibly from hafted stone chisels or wooden implements, now decayed entirely. Some surfaces display traces of organic compounds, perhaps from rope fibers or sap used as adhesives, suggesting that the builders may have employed complex composite tools that have long since vanished. This hidden evidence hints at an unseen layer of ingenuity, revealing methods lost to millennia. Modern experiments struggle to replicate the same results using only Neolithic implements. Archaeologists and experimental archaeologists have attempted to move smaller stones with levers, ropes, and wooden rollers, only to discover that even a single monolith demands more coordination than anticipated. Carving reliefs on smaller stones using flint tools has been achieved, but replicating the scale and uniformity of the largest enclosures proves daunting. These attempts underscore the ingenuity of the original builders and the ingenuity now lost to time. Studies with accurate replicas suggest a careful division of labour, each part flowing like a musical score. Recent reconstructions using only flint tools, wooden levers, and rope indicate that moving a single T-shaped pillar requires dozens of participants acting in precise synchronization. Even minor missteps can crack the stone or misalign the placement. Such experiments imply that the original builders must have developed systems of signals, rhythm, or ritualized coordination to orchestrate monumental construction. A human technology of organization no longer tangible except in its results. Some tools may have vanished, lost to deliberate concealment or time itself. Organic handles, wooden levers, or rope harnesses may have decayed entirely, leaving no trace. There is speculation that certain implements were intentionally buried or repurposed elsewhere, part of a ritual or maintenance cycle long forgotten. The absence of evidence does not imply the absence of existence. The very invisibility of the tools contributes to Göbekli Tepe's enduring enigma. Patterns in the work suggest not improvisation, but instruction passed across generations. Despite the lack of writing, the pillars exhibit repeated forms, consistent proportions, and standardized motifs that could only emerge from sustained knowledge transfer. The builders may have taught apprentices through observation, demonstration, and repetition, encoding construction techniques into ritual, ceremony, or communal labor practices. Each pillar seems to bear not only imagery, but also the memory of the methods by which it was raised and shaped. Even the simplest instruments show wear consistent with tasks far beyond what was expected. Microscopic analysis of flint hammers reveals pitting and polish from repeated impact, suggesting that stones were not merely struck randomly but used with deliberation, striking at precise angles to achieve specific results. These small implements, though unremarkable in appearance, become powerful evidence of methodical engineering capturing human ingenuity in miniature. The absence of metal or advanced levers only magnifies the mystery of engineering control. Without iron tools, wheels, or pulleys, the erection of massive pillars and the alignment of circular enclosures defies conventional expectations. Scholars propose methods involving ramps, earthen supports, counterweights, and coordinated human effort, yet all remain hypothetical, insufficient to fully explain the precision achieved. Göbekli Tepe challenges the assumption that technological sophistication must precede monumental construction. Every chipped flint and abraded stone is a whisper of vanished skill. In a way, the tools themselves are silent narrators, telling of hands that measured, struck, and carved with an understanding that left no direct record. Their disappearance makes each surviving flake or hammer fragment more meaningful. It becomes a cipher, a fragmentary proof that the builder's knowledge was once tangible, now obscured by millennia. Methods behind Göbekli Tepe's construction may remain entirely invisible to modern eyes. Some theories suggest the use of temporary wooden scaffolds, lever and pulley arrangements with organic ropes, or counterbalance systems designed for synchronized human effort. None of these materials survived, and their potential existence can only be inferred from indirect evidence. The site itself becomes the record, a stone archive of performance, skill, and labor long erased from the material record. the vanished tools challenge our understanding of what early humans could conceive and execute. They force a reconsideration of the cognitive abilities, planning, and social coordination of hunter-gatherers, revealing capacities that conventional timelines of technological development fail to acknowledge. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that monumental architecture is not inherently tied to urbanization or metallurgy, but can emerge from extraordinary knowledge preserved in culture and practice. In the site's muted stillness, the stones themselves hold the secrets of skills we cannot fully grasp. They are the enduring remnants of labour, knowledge and precision, frozen in place for millennia. Each T-shaped pillar, each carved predator, each carefully levelled foundation becomes a monument to human ingenuity, now invisible to us. Knowledge whose instruments have been erased, leaving only questions and the silent eloquence of stone. Any tools used to shape and position these stones have disappeared, yet their extraordinary legacy remains. The fox that guides the stars. Throughout the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, one image recurs with quiet insistence: the fox. Carved in varying sizes and postures, these figures appear across multiple enclosures, some crouched low, others mid-stride, their ears alert, tails curling with almost deliberate elegance. Unlike the more obvious depictions of boars, snakes or birds, the fox remains elusive in meaning, its purpose hidden behind millennia of soil and silence. Archaeologists have noted that the carvings are rarely isolated. Each fox appears in relation to other animals or to particular architectural features, hinting at a narrative or symbolic system beyond our immediate understanding. The precision of these images, sometimes spanning 2 meters in height, demonstrates that they were not casual decorations, but central to the mental and spiritual landscape of the builders. In some enclosures, the foxes occupy positions that suggest careful observation of the surrounding environment. On Pillar 27 in Enclosure C, a fox faces a sequence of carved birds that ascend in seemingly deliberate order, as if tracing an unseen path across the sky. This alignment has prompted speculation that the fox may serve as more than a terrestrial creature. It could represent a mythic guide or celestial figure, marking the movement of stars or constellations across the heavens. In comparative mythology, foxes often occupy liminal roles, bridging worlds of life and death, day and night, earth and sky. While we cannot know the exact stories told 12,000 years ago, the recurrence of the fox across Göbekli Tepe suggests a symbol encoded with both cultural and astronomical significance, a guide meant to orient both ritual and thought. The context of these carvings deepens when viewed alongside other iconography. In certain enclosures, foxes are paired with predatory birds or serpents, creatures that also carry potential symbolic weight. Birds, likely representing the heavens or the souls of the departed, soar above the fox while snakes coil below, perhaps embodying the underworld or forces of transformation. The fox's placement between these realms may indicate a role as a mediator, an intermediary that bridges the earthly and the cosmic. Some researchers have drawn attention to the position of the fox relative to narrow pillars that could frame specific lines of sight toward horizon points where the sun rises or sets during solstices. These observations suggest that the fox might not only belong to a mythic narrative, but also serve a practical function in an early form of sky mapping. The material and technique of the fox carvings reinforce their significance. Each figure is carved from the same dense limestone as the monumental pillars themselves, yet the detailing is painstaking. Incised lines define fur, facial features and muscular structure, giving the animal an almost animated quality. In several instances, the fox appears on relief panels rather than full pillars, emphasizing its story-like quality, as if these creatures were characters in a larger tableau. Scholars have noted that similar techniques appear across multiple enclosures, pointing to a standardized symbolic language rather than individual artistic whim. The repeated attention to anatomical accuracy and compositional placement indicates that these images were part of a shared knowledge system, perhaps memorized and transmitted orally through ritual performance. A particularly compelling aspect lies in the fox's apparent connection to the night sky. While direct evidence remains scarce, archaeoastronomical studies have hinted that certain pillars might align with specific stellar events. Enclosure D, for example, is oriented in a way that aligns closely with the rising of Sirius and the Pleiades cluster during the pre-dawn hours of the winter solstice. Fox carvings within sightlines of these alignments might have been intended as guides, markers that direct attention toward particular celestial phenomena. In this sense, the fox transforms from a terrestrial animal into a symbolic navigator, guiding the gaze of ancient observers through the immensity of the cosmos. The idea that such abstract astronomical knowledge could be encoded in stone challenges assumptions about the cognitive sophistication of early hunter-gatherers. The fox also interacts with scale and movement in ways that deepen its mysterious role. On Pillar 18 in Enclosure B, a fox is carved so that its body stretches upward along the pillar, leading the eye towards an adjacent relief of a crouching human figure holding a staff or ceremonial object. The juxtaposition of the fox and human suggests a shared ritual or cosmological story, where the animal functions as a companion or guide in symbolic journeys. Small details, such as clawed feet positioned over etch patterns resembling stars or tracks, hint that the fox's path may have been understood as both literal and metaphysical. Such subtleties suggest a culture capable of complex abstraction, capable of weaving narrative, ritual, and environmental observation into a coherent symbolic system. Recurring motifs of foxes appear to transcend individual enclosures. Excavation reports note that similar designs, often showing the fox in dynamic motion, appear in pillars separated by tens of meters or even across different levels of the site. This repetition raises profound questions. Why was this creature so central that it demanded continual representation? One theory proposes that the fox was a mnemonic device, a visual anchor for oral traditions and ritual knowledge. In a society without written language, these symbols could have functioned as a shared memory system, encoding stories, seasonal patterns, or moral teachings across generations. The fox becomes not merely an image, but a vessel of cultural continuity, its presence bridging the invisible threads that connected the people of Göbekli Tepe across space and time. Even more striking is the fox's occasional association with abstract symbols that resemble spirals or star clusters. Some pillars depict a fox seemingly chasing or interacting with geometric forms, shapes that have no immediate earthly referent. Scholars have speculated that these shapes may represent constellations, cycles of lunar and solar movement, or even calendrical markers. The fox, then, may have served as a cognitive tool, guiding the observer's understanding of temporal and cosmic rhythms. Such an interpretation suggests that Göbekli Tepe's builders were not merely erecting ritual spaces, but encoding an entire cosmology, one in which the fox acted as both guide and storyteller. The very presence of the fox challenges assumptions about the development of symbolic thought. In the Paleolithic context of Göbekli Tepe, the prominence of a non-human figure as a potential cosmic guide suggests that abstraction and myth-making were already highly sophisticated. This symbolism, layered into the architecture itself, indicates a society that perceived the natural and celestial worlds as deeply intertwined, each influencing ritual, social order, and perhaps even the very notion of human destiny. The fox's repeated appearance implies an enduring significance, its guidance extending beyond earthly concerns into the intangible, mysterious movements of the stars above. No single theory can fully explain the foxes of Göbekli Tepe, and perhaps that is part of their power. They remain observers and guides, silent witnesses carved in stone, pointing toward ideas, stories, and celestial patterns that have been lost to the passage of 12 millennia. Their continued presence challenges modern assumptions about the origins of symbolic thought, ritual practice, and the earliest forms of astronomy. Each fox remains a question pressed into limestone, inviting speculation but withholding certainty, a bridge between human curiosity and the unfathomable knowledge of the past. The fox watches the night sky as it has for thousands of years, leaving a trail of questions etched into stone that may never be fully understood. The first calendar on Earth. Above the restless Earth, the sky traced invisible patterns that only the keenest eyes could follow. The sun rose and fell along predictable paths, and the moon waxed and waned in a silent, measured rhythm. Stars shifted through their familiar constellations, and the seasons marched with subtle cues: the flowering of plants, the migration of animals, the swelling of rivers after winter rains. For early humans, survival depended on recognizing these cycles, yet observation alone was not enough. The first true calendars required abstraction, a way to record, anticipate, and transmit knowledge about time itself. This need laid the foundation for a practice that would forever transform human understanding of the cosmos. Lunar phases and the shifting path of the sun were more than spectacle. They were guides for survival and ceremony. Hunters tracked the appearance of specific stars to predict the migration of game, while women noted the moon's influence on fertility and planting cycles. Even subtle environmental changes, from the length of shadows to the timing of seasonal floods, provided crucial information. These observations became encoded in ritual practices, storytelling, and primitive marking systems. Across the Near East, early communities developed ways to externalize this knowledge, often using stones, notches, or simple alignments as mnemonic devices. Time, it seems, was first carved into memory before it was carved into stone. Some of the earliest humans began to mark these rhythms with scratches, stones, or subtle earthworks, anticipating the invention of calendars. While there is no written record, archaeologists have identified arrangements of stones and pits that likely functioned as observational tools. By counting lunar cycles, tracking solstices, or observing equinoxes, these proto-calendars allowed humans to anticipate crucial seasonal events. This abstract thinking marks a cognitive leap, the ability to recognize patterns, predict the future, and encode that knowledge for others. Göbekli Tepe, with its monumental pillars and enigmatic carvings, crystallizes this leap, transforming scattered observation into a lasting, tangible system of timekeeping. Göbekli Tepe captures these first abstract attempts in monumental form, where stone and light meet to measure the cosmos. Excavations have revealed enclosures and pillars aligned with extreme precision, their positions suggesting deliberate attention to celestial events rather than mere coincidence. Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone, features symbols that many researchers interpret as representing lunar months and seasonal markers. Across the site, the placement of T-shaped pillars may correspond with solar rise and set points at solstices, while shadows cast across reliefs create ephemeral patterns that change with the seasons. In this sense, the site itself becomes a calendar, translating the sky into stone with uncanny sophistication. Certain pillars align precisely with the rising sun at solstices, while shadowed carvings reveal lunar cycles etched into limestone. For example, narrow gaps between two pillars allow sunlight to strike a carved animal figure only on the winter solstice, creating a transient but deliberate effect. Similar alignments occur for the summer solstice and equinoxes, suggesting the builders understood the sun's annual arc with remarkable accuracy. In some enclosures, crescent motifs carved alongside animals appear to mark lunar months, hinting at a combined solar-lunar system. Such precision implies sustained observation over generations, a deliberate effort to create a communal record of time. Grooves etched into select pillars hint, according to recent studies, at a function as counting marks for lunar days or moon phases. These notches, some barely visible to the naked eye, appear in sequences that repeat across different enclosures, hinting at a standardized system of observation. By tracking these micro-markings, the builders could have anticipated full moons or eclipses, giving them a practical and ceremonial framework for scheduling rituals, gatherings, or seasonal migrations. The precision of these markings, often paired with carefully aligned reliefs of animals or geometric forms, demonstrates a level of astronomical literacy previously thought impossible for pre-agricultural societies. Understanding time may have been as critical as finding food, guiding both ritual and seasonal movement across the landscape. Unlike permanent settlements, Göbekli Tepe shows no evidence of farming or domestic dwellings during its earliest phases, yet its builders invested extraordinary effort in constructing monumental enclosures. This paradox suggests that tracking celestial cycles was deeply connected to social cohesion and ritual rather than immediate economic needs. Timekeeping may have coordinated gatherings, dictated ceremonial calendars, or reinforced social hierarchy, turning the heavens into a shared framework for community life. The stones themselves become silent witnesses to human attempts to master both nature and society through measurement. Long before writing or numbered months, these structures preserved knowledge in ways that would endure far beyond their creators' lifetimes. The precision of the alignments, combined with repeated motifs of animals and abstract symbols, forms a proto-script of temporal understanding. Scholars studying the site note that similar calendrical systems appear only much later in Mesopotamia and Egypt, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe predates what was long thought to be the earliest recorded human attempt to track time. This realization overturns conventional timelines, showing that architectural complexity and astronomical sophistication emerged among hunter-gatherers before the advent of agriculture or urban civilization. The more archaeologists study these alignments, the deeper the mystery becomes. While some pillars mark clear solar events, others remain enigmatic, their purpose hidden in the interplay of shadow and stone. Tiny incisions, subtle notches, and carefully positioned carvings hint at observations now lost to history. It is possible that the builders recorded phenomena we cannot yet decipher, the cycles of Venus, the timing of eclipses, or perhaps abstract mathematical relationships encoded into the pillar's geometry. Each discovery underscores the cognitive sophistication of a people we once assumed were incapable of abstract thought on such a scale. Each observation raises deeper questions. Did these people record time for ceremony, sustenance, or something beyond human comprehension? The alignment of Göbekli Tepe's pillars suggests a knowledge system that was both practical and symbolic. Seasonal light striking certain carvings may have guided rituals, while the very act of constructing the site required long-term planning and intergenerational collaboration. These stones preserve a dual narrative, one of survival and human ingenuity and another of mystery, hinting at an early understanding of the universe's rhythms that predates written language by millennia. The stones hold their secrets tight, hinting that the first calendar on Earth was far more than a tool. It was a bridge between humanity and the stars. The temple without a god. Vast stones rise from the earth, monumental in scale, yet no carved figure sits atop a throne or holds dominion over worshippers. Enclosures rise like silent witnesses, their massive T-shaped pillars arranged with deliberate symmetry, yet the site contains no idol, no effigy, no unmistakable representation of a deity. Archaeologists have scoured every chamber and trench, uncovering intricate reliefs of animals, abstract forms, and geometric shapes, but never a single anthropomorphic god. This absence is not a product of destruction or erosion, it is deliberate, a paradox that has confounded researchers since the first excavations revealed the hidden terraces beneath the Anatolian soil. Göbekli Tepe is sacred without being anthropocentric, a temple whose devotion is directed toward forces unseen. The enclosures form concentric patterns that seem designed to focus attention inward, towards something that cannot be seen. Pillars rise in circles and ovals, enclosing open spaces that suggest gatherings, rituals, or ceremonies. Their arrangement implies an understanding of social choreography, guiding movement, focus, and perhaps even hierarchy, yet no altar or idol dominates the center. Archaeologists have noted that the largest pillars, often reaching 5 meters in height, appear to anchor the space while smaller stones create peripheral rhythms, a design that balances scale, intimacy, and ritual gravity. The spaces themselves become instruments, shaping the human experience and evoking a sense of awe without recourse to divine imagery. Animals leap, coil, and crouch across the pillars, their forms striking yet detached from any single deity or narrative. Boars, snakes, birds, foxes, and abstract motifs appear repeatedly, yet they do not correspond to mythologies known from later Anatolian cultures. Some figures are carved in high relief, others etched with delicate incisions, some face each other across enclosures, as if engaged in an eternal silent dialogue. These creatures may represent qualities, cosmological forces, or mnemonic symbols, but they do not preside as gods. Instead, they inhabit the space like witnesses or participants in a ritual whose meaning has been lost, offering humanity a glimpse of a belief system untethered from anthropomorphism. Pigment traces under the carvings reveal that colour once breathed life into the animals and abstract designs. Analysis of microscopic residues on several pillars has revealed remnants of ochre, red and yellow iron oxide, and other mineral-based pigments. This evidence implies that the enclosures were not merely stark limestone, but may have been vividly painted, adding a dynamic visual element to ritual practice. The choice of colours may have carried symbolic meaning, enhancing the spiritual or mnemonic impact of the carvings. Light interacting with painted reliefs would have created dramatic contrasts during different times of the day or year, reinforcing the sense that the temple was designed for an immersive, multi-sensory experience that did not require a deity to dominate the space. The placement of pillars suggests a choreography of human movement. perhaps guiding ceremonies or ritual observation. Some enclosures feature narrow passages and carefully spaced stones, directing footsteps, line of sight, and interaction with carvings. Scholars speculate that rituals may have involved processions, time gestures, or the alignment of observers with specific features, such as rising sunlight or shadowed reliefs. The spatial logic of Göbekli Tepe implies a society capable of complex planning and communal coordination, where sacred practice was embedded in architecture itself. Here, devotion manifests not in icons but in participation, a performance of reverence encoded in the stone. Sunlight and shadow play across the carvings in fleeting ephemeral displays, turning the architecture itself into an instrument of experience. Certain pillars capture the glow of dawn or the angle of the setting sun, illuminating specific animals or patterns at precise times of the year. Shadows cast by adjacent stones create transient tableaux, shifting with the seasons, and light penetrating narrow gaps occasionally highlights reliefs in dramatic effect. These deliberate interactions of light and stone transform the enclosures into dynamic, living calendars, reinforcing ritual practice through sensory engagement. Worship, in this context, is as much a temporal and perceptual phenomenon as a spiritual one. Some reliefs depict abstract forms resembling intertwined circles, spirals, or concentric patterns whose meaning remains elusive. These abstract motifs appear repeatedly across multiple enclosures and often accompany animal figures, yet they do not correspond to any known script or symbolic system from the period. Scholars have proposed that these patterns may represent natural phenomena such as celestial cycles, water flow, or seasonal change, encoded in a way that guided ritual practice or social memory. The regularity and repetition of these designs suggest intentionality rather than decoration, hinting at a symbolic language unique to Göbekli Tepe. Their presence reinforces the idea that sacred meaning could be conveyed through geometry, rhythm, and abstraction, rather than anthropomorphic imagery, underscoring the site's enigmatic nature. Compared to later temples of Mesopotamia or Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe reveals a sacred space that thrives without idols or obvious divine representation. Whereas early temples in Uruk or Çatalhöyük center around statues, shrines, or altars, Göbekli Tepe predates these by millennia and emphasizes abstraction, scale, and environmental orchestration. Its builders relied on human perception, architectural ingenuity, and symbolic animal motifs to convey sanctity. This contrast highlights a pivotal moment in the evolution of religion. Devotion need not be anthropomorphic, and sacred architecture can shape belief through form, light, and movement alone. The site demonstrates that the earliest humans conceived of spiritual experience in ways that remain alien to later historical norms. The absence of gods challenges assumptions about the origins of belief, hinting at abstract forms of spirituality previously thought unimaginable for hunter-gatherers. It suggests that reverence may have been directed toward cosmic cycles, ancestral forces, or conceptual powers rather than personified deities. The builders' focus on communal enclosures, monumental scale, and repeated animal motifs implies that sacredness existed as a shared, intangible understanding. By eliminating anthropomorphic figures, they may have created a space where ritual, memory, and observation merged, encouraging participants to experience the divine in patterns, rhythms, and relationships, rather than through familiar faces. Through their stillness, the stones pose questions about devotion, ceremonial practice, and hidden forces that inspired their makers. Each pillar and relief invites speculation. Were the carvings used as teaching tools, mnemonic devices, or records of cosmological knowledge? Did the builders attempt to map celestial events, encode social hierarchies, or evoke collective memory? The deliberate craftsmanship, immense labour, and carefully planned layout testify to a society capable of sophisticated symbolic thought. Yet despite these traces of intelligence, the ultimate focus of their worship remains a riddle, one that continues to baffle archaeologists and historians alike. Every step taken across the terraces of Göbekli Tepe confronts the observer with a paradox: a temple without a god, yet undeniably sacred, monumental, and purposeful, where devotion is engraved in stone, light, shadow, and memory. The circle that measures the sky. A perfect circle emerges from the earth, its geometry suggesting a mind attuned to the heavens. Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe stands as one of the most enigmatic formations within the site, its pillars arranged with deliberate symmetry and careful spacing. Unlike earlier enclosures dominated by animal motifs or abstract reliefs, the circle itself seems to encode a celestial logic, its very layout reflecting arcs and alignments that echo the movements of sun, moon, and stars. Every pillar, every space between stones, appears measured not merely for structural stability, but as if the architects were translating the sky into stone, creating a three-dimensional map that has endured for more than 12 millennia. Within Enclosure D, each pillar seems deliberately positioned, forming arcs that echo the passage of stars and planets across the night sky. Archaeologists note that certain T-shaped monoliths align with points on the horizon where the sun rises and sets during solstices, while others correspond to lunar extremes or prominent star clusters visible to the naked eye. The consistency of these alignments across the circular layout suggests careful observation over generations, requiring both patience and precise understanding of celestial cycles. Here, architecture becomes a tool for tracking cosmic rhythm, a physical manifestation of knowledge previously assumed impossible for pre-agricultural societies. Measurements of angles and distances reveal a precision that challenges assumptions about prehistoric builders. The inner diameter of the circle, the spacing between pillars, and the height of certain stones appear calibrated to exact proportions, hinting at a rudimentary understanding of geometry and mathematics. Some researchers propose that the circle's dimensions were intended to measure the rising or setting angles of key stars throughout the year. Others suggest that the subtle gradations in pillar height created sightlines for observers to track celestial events from specific vantage points. In any case, the meticulous engineering required to construct such a space indicates a sophistication rarely attributed to hunter-gatherer cultures. The terrain around the site hints that the circle's layout could align with features on the horizon. Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have noted that certain distant hills and depressions align with key pillars in Enclosure D, potentially serving as fixed points for observing solar and stellar events. These natural features, when combined with the circular arrangement of the pillars, could have functioned as sightlines for tracking the rising or setting of prominent stars and the sun at solstices and equinoxes. This integration of landscape and architecture implies a sophisticated awareness of the surrounding environment, suggesting that the builders were not only precise in their construction, but also deeply attuned to the interaction between stone, sky, and earth. Such observations underscore Göbekli Tepe's role as a fully integrated astronomical instrument rather than a symbolic or decorative circle alone. Subtle reliefs and etched symbols may correspond to constellations, lunar phases, or solar positions, though their exact meaning remains elusive. Birds, serpents, foxes, and abstract geometric patterns adorn the stones in positions that seem to interact with the circle's alignments. Some motifs appear repeatedly at specific points, as if marking significant celestial events or guiding the attention of those moving through the space. While modern interpretation cannot fully decode their purpose, the combination of geometric precision and symbolic carving hints at an integrated system of observation, memory, and ritual that bridge the human and cosmic realms. Walking the perimeter of the circle, one can sense how movement, observation, and ritual may have intersected in orchestrated timing. Narrow gaps between pillars allow sunlight to penetrate at precise angles on particular days, while shadows stretch and shift across reliefs in patterns that change with the seasons. Participants may have moved along predetermined paths, pausing to observe illuminated carvings or aligning their gaze with marked horizon points. In this way, the circle functioned not only as a passive observatory but as an interactive instrument, merging human action, architectural form, and celestial phenomena into a coherent, almost choreographed experience. Compared to later known observatories, Göbekli Tepe demonstrates astronomical ambition at a scale and sophistication previously thought impossible for its time. Ancient sites such as Stonehenge or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia bear clear evidence of solar and lunar observation, but they postdate Göbekli Tepe by millennia. The combination of monumental circular architecture, carefully aligned pillars, and carved symbols at this site suggests that early humans were capable of profound astronomical insight long before the development of writing, mathematics, or agriculture. The circle thus stands as a precursor to systematic celestial observation, an archaeological record of a mind reaching beyond immediate survival toward the mysteries of the cosmos. Each alignment, arc, and carved detail raises questions. Did these early architects measure the stars for survival, ceremony, or something entirely beyond modern comprehension? The repetition of specific angles and motifs implies deliberate intent, yet we lack any written explanation. Perhaps the circle served as a calendar, a stage for ritual, or a tool for passing down observational knowledge across generations. It may have allowed hunter-gatherer societies to predict seasonal changes, plan communal gatherings, or encode sacred meaning into spatial patterns. The ambiguity of its function is precisely what makes the circle both compelling and haunting, suggesting a sophistication in abstract thought that challenges conventional narratives of human development. Marks of repeated touch across the stones suggest the circle was engaged with over generations. Excavations have revealed scratches and grooves on the bases of certain pillars, possibly marking observational points or serving as guides for ritual movement. The arrangement of these features indicates that the builders considered not just vertical and horizontal dimensions, but also the practical engagement of humans within the space. Every step, every glance, every play of light and shadow may have been a deliberate component of an astronomical and spiritual system whose principles remain largely undeciphered. The circle holds its secrets in stone and shadow, hinting that the sky was written here long before the first astronomers could record it. It stands as a testament to a people who observed, measured, and translated the heavens into monumental form without written language or numeric notation. The interplay of geometry, light, and reliefs creates a multi-layered experience that continues to inspire awe, leaving archaeologists and historians grappling with the extraordinary intellectual achievements of a culture once thought primitive. And yet, despite the clarity of its arcs and alignments, no one can say with certainty what the builders of Göbekli Tepe truly sought to measure or understand in the vast, inscrutable sky. The ritual of light and shadow. Sunlight pierces the stone, slipping through narrow gaps to illuminate a single pillar in fleeting brilliance. At Göbekli Tepe, this phenomenon is not random. Certain enclosures appear designed to capture the sun's rays at specific angles, casting sudden, dramatic light across carved reliefs. Archaeologists have noted that these effects coincide with solstices, equinoxes, or other astronomical markers, suggesting that the builders understood how to manipulate light to create temporal and ceremonial experiences. The shifting illumination transforms the static stone into a dynamic medium, revealing patterns and forms that exist only for a moment, then vanish again, as if the architecture itself were performing a ritual. The reliefs of serpents, foxes, and birds emerge from shadow only at certain times, as if the architecture itself performs a ritual. Carvings that are barely visible in the dim interior suddenly appear in sharp contrast when sunlight strikes at just the right angle. This ephemeral unveiling may have conveyed meaning to observers, emphasizing transformation, renewal, or the cyclical nature of time. The choice of animals is deliberate. Their placement and orientation often align with light paths, creating interplay between motif and illumination that could only have been planned with careful observation and repeated experimentation. Seasonal shifts transform the interior spaces, casting patterns that repeat year after year, invisible yet deliberate. Scholars suggest that the builders anticipated changes in solar position, using architecture to encode time into daily and annual rhythms. Narrow corridors, open circles, and pillar spacing all contribute to these effects, channeling light and shadow in ways that interact with human perception. As the sun moves along the horizon over months, certain reliefs are highlighted, while others disappear into darkness, creating a constantly evolving display that may have guided ritual activity, meditation, or collective gatherings. Observers moving through the enclosures would have experienced light and shadow as dynamic guides, marking moments of ceremony or contemplation. The architecture encourages movement and attention, directing gaze and gesture toward illuminated carvings or specific stone alignments. Evidence of wear on flooring surfaces and the bases of pillars suggests repeated human interaction, indicating that participants likely followed predetermined paths to witness these celestial effects. Light, in this sense, becomes a form of instruction, an intangible yet perceptible force shaping behavior, awareness, and spiritual experience without relying on idols or written language. Some carvings appear to anticipate illumination, positioned to catch the sun's rays or the moon's glow in precise alignment. Reliefs of birds with outstretched wings, curling serpents, and abstract spiral motifs often occupy positions that intersect with projected light, suggesting intentional timing. Recent studies reveal that even minor variations in pillar orientation or carving depth alter the visual effect, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of light behavior and human perception. These subtleties may have been critical for conveying meaning, creating awe, or synchronizing rituals with celestial cycles. The orientation of the pillars hints that even moonlight could have been intentionally incorporated into the design. Archaeoastronomers have noted that certain reliefs and pillar alignments interact not only with sunlight but also with the moon's path, especially during full moons or lunar standstills. At specific times of the year, moonlight would strike carvings in ways that mirror the daytime illumination of solstices, suggesting that rituals may have been designed to continue after dusk. This dual consideration of sun and moon implies a remarkable understanding of celestial cycles, incorporating both diurnal and nocturnal observation into ceremonial architecture. Participants may have witnessed transformations under both solar and lunar light, deepening the sensory and symbolic power of the space while connecting human activity with larger cosmic rhythms. The interplay of stone and light turns the circular enclosures into living instruments, where architecture measures not just space but time and perception. Light and shadow define pathways, create focal points, and transform mundane observation into extraordinary experience. This integration of sensory phenomena, spatial design, and temporal awareness represents a remarkable achievement for a society that lacked writing, formal mathematics, or metallurgy. The enclosures operate as instruments of subtle precision, offering participants an orchestrated encounter with the rhythms of the natural and cosmic worlds. Later temples and monuments used light symbolically, yet Göbekli Tepe achieves this effect without text, deity, or mechanical device, relying purely on stone and natural phenomena. From Mesopotamian ziggurats to Egyptian temples, light was later employed to highlight altars, statues, or sacred spaces. At Göbekli Tepe, there are no altars or idols, only stone, reliefs, and the deliberate choreography of illumination. The ingenuity lies not in decoration but in harnessing natural forces to evoke awe, reverence, and perhaps understanding. The site transforms ordinary observation into ritualized experience, creating a sacred rhythm embedded directly in the architecture itself. Traces of pigment on certain reliefs suggest that color may have amplified the effects of light and shadow. Microscopic analysis has revealed residues of ochre, red iron oxide, and other mineral pigments on select carvings, which would have appeared vibrant when struck by sunlight. The combination of shape, color, and illumination transforms static stone into living imagery, further enhancing the ceremonial or spiritual impact. Seasonal sunlight passing over these painted reliefs may have created dramatic tableaux that reinforced ritual meaning or synchronized collective attention, allowing early humans to connect natural cycles with cultural expression. The enclosure's narrow passages and circular layouts enhance these ephemeral effects, directing light and shadow with remarkable precision. Certain pillars cast long, moving shadows across the reliefs, creating interaction between static carvings and changing illumination. The alignment of these shadows, coupled with the placement of human observers, suggests that ceremonies may have incorporated both participation and observation, creating an experience that was both communal and sensory-rich. Such architectural sophistication indicates that Göbekli Tepe's builders were not only skilled engineers but also keenly attuned to human perception and ritualized movement. The ritual of light and shadow leaves a lingering question. What was the intended meaning behind these fleeting illuminations? Were they designed to mark time, to inspire awe, to teach, or to connect humans with unseen forces? While the precise purpose remains unknown, the deliberate orchestration of light, shadow, reliefs, and architecture demonstrates a level of cognitive and observational sophistication that continues to challenge modern assumptions about pre-agricultural societies. As the sun moves across the sky, casting its transient glow, one cannot help but wonder what messages the stones once whispered to those who walk their illuminated paths. The hidden meaning of the serpent. Serpents coil, twist, and surge across stone, appearing on pillars in patterns that defy simple explanation. At Göbekli Tepe, these creatures recur with remarkable consistency, etched into limestone with a fluidity that suggests both artistic skill and symbolic purpose. Some pillars are dominated by single, massive serpents, their elongated bodies stretching from base to summit, while others feature multiple intertwined forms, creating a visual narrative that seems to pulse with life despite the stillness of stone. The prevalence of these carvings across enclosures raises questions about their significance. Were they guardians, celestial symbols, or representations of forces far beyond the human experience? In select relief, snakes twist around companions, their forms hinting at ancient tales long obscured. Foxes, birds, and even abstract geometric patterns are frequently entwined with serpentine lines, as if the carvings encode interactions or conflicts between natural and supernatural realms. Scholars suggest that these juxtapositions may indicate mythic storytelling, perhaps recounting creation, cycles of predation, or transformative journeys. The variety in depiction, from coiled aggression to poised stillness, points to a sophisticated symbolic vocabulary, one that communicated meaning visually in a culture without written language. The placement of these carvings often corresponds to focal points within the enclosures, suggesting intentional ritual significance. Certain serpents occupy central pillars or align with entryways, commanding attention from anyone moving through the space. Others appear on peripheral stones, where shadows and angles might accentuate their forms at particular times of day or season. This deliberate positioning implies that the snakes were not mere decoration, but part of a choreographed interaction between architecture, observer, and perhaps cosmic phenomena, creating a multi-layered experience that intertwined perception, ritual, and meaning. In several instances, serpents appear poised in motion, as if the stone itself animates a scene of danger, fertility, or transformation. Their heads arch, tongues flick, and bodies twist in complex loops, sometimes directed toward human or animal figures. These dynamic poses evoke a sense of energy and presence, as though the carvings were meant to be perceived as living entities during ceremonial activity. The serpent's fluidity may have symbolized the unseen forces governing life and death, or the perpetual cycles of change that govern the natural world. Comparisons with later myths in Mesopotamia and Anatolia hint at recurring symbolic roles for snakes, yet Göbekli Tepe predates these cultures by millennia. In later civilizations, serpents often signify wisdom, fertility, or guardianship of sacred knowledge. While direct lineage cannot be confirmed, the repeated emphasis on serpentine imagery at Göbekli Tepe suggests an early human understanding of snakes as powerful symbols, creatures associated with both creation and destruction, movement and stillness, life and death. These carvings may preserve the earliest recorded conceptualization of such archetypes, frozen in stone for eternity. Experts suggest that the sinuous serpent conveys cycles of life, death, and rebirth, carved repeatedly throughout the enclosures. The circular and coiling patterns mimic the spiral movements found in nature, from water currents to the growth of plants, implying that the builders saw themselves as part of a greater cosmic order. The repetition of serpents across enclosures and pillars may have reinforced collective understanding of these cycles, communicating abstract concepts through concrete visual means. In a society without writing, such carvings would serve as a mnemonic device, encoding essential knowledge about life, survival, and the cosmos in the language of stone. Participants moving through the enclosures would have encountered these carvings at precise vantage points, perhaps invoking reflection, awe, or fear. The combination of scale, placement, and detail could have guided ritual behavior, creating encounters that felt both intimate and overwhelming. The architecture and reliefs together choreographed perception, emphasizing movement, attention, and awareness. Shadows might fall across coiled bodies at certain times, accentuating curves or hiding features, adding a temporal dimension to the static imagery. This interplay between stone and observer transformed the serpents into living symbols, experienced rather than simply observed. Microscopic analysis of the serpent carvings reveals traces of pigment and wear that hint at ceremonial interaction. Studies of the limestone surfaces show faint remnants of red ochre and other natural pigments, suggesting that certain serpents were once highlighted in colour, possibly to enhance visibility during rituals or to convey symbolic meaning. Additionally, patterns of abrasion along the bodies of some carvings indicate repeated human contact, as if participants touched, traced, or followed the curves of the serpents during ceremonies. This combination of pigment and tactile engagement points to a multisensory ritual experience, where the serpents were not only visual symbols, but also objects of physical interaction, reinforcing their significance within the spiritual or ceremonial life of the site. Evidence suggests that the serpents may also have had a celestial or cosmological dimension. Some reliefs appear near pillars aligned with the horizon or with specific astronomical markers, implying that their forms may mirror celestial events, such as lunar cycles or star paths. The connection between serpentine imagery and the sky is echoed in multiple prehistoric cultures, where snakes were often associated with the heavens, water, or underworld. At Göbekli Tepe, these connections may reflect an early attempt to link earthly and cosmic orders, embedding the mysteries of the sky into the tactile reality of stone. Even after 12,000 years, the serpent's silent language leaves us questioning the intentions, beliefs, and knowledge of their creators. We can measure angles, identify patterns, and draw comparisons, yet the meaning of each coiled form, each interaction with other reliefs, remains elusive. Were these symbols protective, instructive, spiritual, or all three at once? The enclosures themselves provide context, but the ultimate significance, the full story the serpents were meant to tell, remains hidden, a riddle encoded in limestone that has survived millennia. Winding through the ancient pillars, the serpents at Göbekli Tepe invite reflection on humanity's earliest attempts to understand and interpret the world. They speak of cognition, artistry, and spiritual imagination long before written history, suggesting that even pre-agricultural societies possessed complex symbolic thought. These carvings offer a rare glimpse into the minds of those who first transformed stone into memory, myth, and ritual, bridging the gap between human curiosity and the vast, unknowable forces that govern their existence. Casting long shadows across the carvings as the stone coils twist under the shadowed light, one cannot help but wonder what ancient truths the serpents were meant to guard from the eyes of humankind. The pillar that speaks of sacrifice. A monolith rises from the ground, its surface carved with figures that immediately unsettle the eye. The stone is taller than an average human, its smooth limestone face meticulously sculpted to depict scenes that combine human fragility with animal power. Headless humans crouch, contort, or lie sprawled across the pillar, surrounded by predators such as lions, leopards, and birds of prey. Each image appears carefully arranged, deliberately placed to capture attention, commanding a presence that feels both ceremonial and foreboding. The sheer scale of the reliefs emphasizes the intensity of the scenes, ensuring that any observer would confront the stark reality of life, death, and danger. Headless human forms crouch, fall, or are surrounded by predators, frozen in eternal struggle. Their limbs bend unnaturally, torsos twisted as if captured mid-motion. The absence of heads may signify more than mutilation. It could symbolize the severing of individuality, identity, or earthly ties, a deliberate abstraction emphasizing mortality and the ritualized passage of life. Predators loom over the fallen figures, their carved muscles taut and eyes wide, evoking the ever-present threat of nature and reinforcing the precarious balance between survival and annihilation. The imagery is both literal and symbolic, blending fear, respect, and narrative into a single tableau etched in stone. The arrangement suggests intent. These images were meant to be seen, to convey messages beyond words. Carvings are oriented towards central spaces within the enclosure, ensuring visibility from multiple vantage points. The interplay between human figures and predators is rarely random. Each placement reinforces tension, hierarchy, or interaction. Some animals appear dominant, poised above the human forms, while others twist around, creating movement and narrative within the stone. The pillar transforms into a story in relief, each curve and line meticulously calculated to provoke thought, reflection, or awe among those who approached it. Placement within the enclosure transforms perception, with the largest figures dominating central spaces and commanding attention. Peripheral stones contain smaller, less detailed reliefs, suggesting a deliberate hierarchy of imagery. Movement through the space would have dictated the order in which observers encountered the carvings, creating a temporal sequence that heightened the psychological impact. Shadows and sunlight striking the figures at different angles would have further dramatized the scenes, making the stone almost alive in its presentation. Participants may have been guided along these paths to witness sequences of ritualized violence and cosmic order, each moment reinforcing the solemnity of the site. Other motifs entwine with these depictions, creating layers of meaning that mingle the sacred and the dangerous. Serpents coil near the fallen humans, foxes watch from the periphery, and abstract geometric shapes intersect the reliefs. These additional carvings may have served to contextualize the violent imagery, linking earthly mortality with transformation, cosmic cycles, or divine forces. The combined symbolism suggests that sacrifice, whether literal, metaphorical, or symbolic, was central to the culture's worldview, embedded in their architecture and encoded in stone for eternity. Later societies recorded sacrifice in texts and monuments, yet Göbekli Tepe achieves this with stark imagery and spatial orchestration alone. Unlike written accounts or altars, these carvings do not narrate events in linear fashion. They evoke sensation, emotion, and memory through form and placement. Lions, leopards, and vultures appear not merely as predators, but as active agents in a ritualized drama, their presence amplifying the tension between life and death. This method of communication indicates a sophisticated understanding of visual storytelling and communal experience, allowing observers to absorb meaning experientially rather than cognitively. Observers moving through the space would have confronted these carvings in sequence, each one provoking reflection, fear, or awe. The placement of human and animal forms along movement paths suggests deliberate choreography, where perception itself became a component of ritual. Hands may have touched pillars, eyes followed lines, and bodies positioned themselves in response to the visual narrative, creating an immersive encounter. The psychological effect of facing large, headless human forms in proximity to predators cannot be overstated. The carvings convey both a warning and a lesson, integrating mortality, respect, and perhaps even initiation into sacred knowledge. Microscopic analysis reveals traces of pigment and wear that hint at ceremonial interaction. Faint red ochre and mineral pigments suggest that certain carvings were once vividly highlighted, accentuating key elements or figures. Patterns of abrasion along the human forms and predator bodies indicate repeated human contact, suggesting that participants may have touched or traced the reliefs during rituals. This combination of colour and tactile engagement would have reinforced the carving's meaning, transforming static images into active tools of ritual, memory, and teaching, bridging the gap between observation and participation in a pre-literate culture. The pillar's imagery may also encode a deeper cosmological or symbolic framework. The depiction of predators dominating humans could represent forces beyond human control, perhaps the cycles of nature, divine judgment, or the inescapable law of mortality. In other enclosures, similar motifs recur, suggesting a shared symbolic lexicon that tied together enclosures, rituals, and participants' understanding of the world. The spatial repetition, scale, and variation of these carvings imply a culture deeply attuned to narrative, ritual, and the psychological effect of art as a means of conveying complex ideas about life, death, and the cosmos. Even after millennia, the monolith communicates a tension between mortality and transcendence, leaving its true purpose shrouded in shadow. Scholars can analyze form, placement, and comparative culture, yet the precise intention, whether symbolic, literal, or both, remains elusive. Was the pillar meant to instruct, warn, initiate, or commemorate? Its meaning is layered and enigmatic, like a silent sermon in stone. The images confront modern observers with questions about early human cognition, ritual behavior, and the profound capacity of pre-agricultural societies to encode complex social and spiritual concepts into their architecture. With shadows stretching over the headless figures and prowling predators, one cannot help but wonder what rites, fears, or secrets the builders of Göbekli Tepe sought to immortalize in this monolith. The engineers before agriculture. The first striking reality of Göbekli Tepe is that its massive stone pillars were raised long before humans cultivated grain or settled into villages. Archaeologists have long assumed that monumental construction required a stable, agrarian society with surplus resources, Yet here stands evidence that complex architecture predates organised farming by thousands of years. The site contains rings of enormous T-shaped pillars, some rising over 5 meters in height and weighing tens of tons, arranged with precise spacing and orientation. The implications are staggering. A hunter-gatherer society, reliant on foraging and seasonal movement, produced structures that demanded planning, collaboration, and technical skill far beyond what was thought possible in this era. Some of these limestone monoliths tower over 5 meters, weighing tens of tons, yet they were quarried, carved, and transported by a society that had no wheeled vehicles, no pack animals, and no permanent settlements. Excavations reveal that the stones were cut from nearby hills using flint tools, then manoeuvred across uneven terrain to the construction site. The feat required not only brute force, but an understanding of leverage, balance, and human coordination. Teams of workers would have needed to synchronize their efforts with remarkable precision, moving enormous weights with ropes, wooden sledges, and ingenuity that modern observers can only imagine. Detailed reliefs etched into the stones demonstrate astonishing precision, with repeated motifs and proportions suggesting both planning and mastery of tools. Animal carvings, abstract symbols, and even human forms appear on multiple pillars, executed with uniformity and care. The consistency across enclosures hints at a shared knowledge of design principles, where measurements, angles, and artistic standards were maintained without written plans or standardized instruments. Each pillar, though unique in its carvings, adheres to an unspoken architectural vocabulary, demonstrating foresight, creativity, and technical sophistication. Organizing hundreds of individuals to quarry, transport, and erect these pillars implies a level of social coordination previously thought impossible for hunter-gatherers. There would have been planners, skilled carvers, transport teams, and laborers, all performing tasks within a communal framework. Food, water, and shelter for such a workforce would have required logistical support, likely provided through cooperative networks that allowed for extended gatherings at the site. The scale of organization indicates that human societies of this period were capable of collective action on a monumental scale, challenging assumptions about pre-agricultural social structures. Quarries located kilometers from the site required sophisticated knowledge of leverage, ramps, and team effort to move massive stones across uneven terrain. Archaeological studies suggest that workers may have constructed temporary ramps or used controlled rolling techniques to position each monolith upright. The process would have been painstaking and dangerous, demanding coordination, endurance, and practical engineering knowledge. The pillar's final placement in circular or oval enclosures also indicates careful surveying, as gaps and spacing were planned to maintain balance, alignment, and visual impact, a level of precision unimaginable without a deep understanding of space and proportion. These monumental efforts demand a reconsideration of the traditional sequence of civilization. Building came before farming, not after. Göbekli Tepe overturns the conventional narrative that agriculture allowed humans to settle, accumulate surplus, and then invest in monumental architecture. Instead, it suggests that social and religious motivation may have driven the development of communal labour, with large-scale construction acting as a catalyst for innovation rather than a product of settled society. The very act of creating these structures could have encouraged experimentation with cultivation, leading gradually to domestication and the eventual rise of cities. The monumental construction may have been driven by ritual, ceremony, or cosmological purpose, motivating labour far beyond subsistence needs. The enclosures contain no evidence of permanent dwellings or agricultural fields. They appear to have been solely ceremonial spaces, where architecture, carvings, and human gathering intersected to form shared experience. The labour invested in quarrying, carving, and the erection of pillars suggests that spiritual or cultural imperatives were powerful motivators, strong enough to unite diverse groups for long periods. This context provides a lens through which to view Göbekli Tepe not only as an engineering marvel, but also as a testament to human imagination, belief, and devotion. Signs of tool use emphasize the advanced abilities of those who constructed the site. Flint picks, chisels, and hammerstones bear marks of repeated, skilled application, indicating that craftsmen were experienced and specialized. Polished surfaces, precise incisions, and careful proportions demonstrate technical knowledge of material properties and carving techniques, allowing them to shape massive limestone blocks with remarkable accuracy. Even in the absence of metal tools or advanced machinery, these early engineers achieved results that rival later civilizations, leaving questions about how such expertise was transmitted and maintained in a pre-literate, pre-agrarian context. Despite millennia of erosion, the layout of Göbekli Tepe reveals the spatial intelligence of its creators. Circular enclosures, axial alignment, and strategic placement of central pillars indicate that these builders possessed both conceptual foresight and practical planning skills. The design reflects not only aesthetic choices, but functional considerations as pathways, entrances, and viewing positions appear deliberately orchestrated to enhance movement, observation, and ritual participation. Such precision challenges modern assumptions about the cognitive capabilities of pre-agricultural humans, suggesting that technical and organizational skill preceded the rise of cities, writing, and complex economies. Though thousands of years have passed, the ingenuity behind Göbekli Tepe still astounds. The site asks us to reconsider what early humans could accomplish with minimal technology, yet extraordinary coordination, vision, and purpose. Monumental construction was not simply the result of material abundance or sedentism. It arose from collective motivation, ritual significance, and social cohesion. The engineers of Göbekli Tepe remind us that the boundaries of human capability are often far broader than our historical models suggest, leaving a shadow of awe and unanswered questions that stretch across the millennia. Standing in mute witness on the hilltops of southeastern Anatolia, the massive stones compel reflection on how a people without farms, cities, or written language achieved a mastery that still defies comprehension today. The lost knowledge of stoneworking. A hand running along the pillar's surface would be met with an unexpected smoothness, as if the stone had been brushed by a skillful craftsman in a forgotten age. The limestone, quarried from nearby hills, bears traces of repeated shaping and polishing. Its edges clean, curves deliberate, and surfaces almost reflective in certain light. Each pillar, whether bearing animal motifs, abstract symbols, or human forms, demonstrates a uniformity that hints at meticulous planning and highly developed technique. The work is precise enough to suggest that these early artisans possessed a practical understanding of geometry, material properties, and tactile feedback that would challenge the assumptions of even modern stoneworkers. Flint and chert marks reveal the exacting methods used to shape enormous blocks, each incision deliberate and controlled. Archaeologists have identified grooves and flake scars that correspond to measured, repeated strokes, evidence that artisans did not work haphazardly but followed specific procedures. Some pillars feature depressions and notches that align with the geometric guidelines, likely serving as reference points for both sculpting and erection. The consistency of technique across multiple enclosures indicates that these methods were widely known, carefully applied, and perhaps even ritualized in their practice, ensuring that each monolith adhered to a communal standard of excellence. The symmetry and proportionality of the carvings defy the presumed limitations of pre-agricultural toolkits. Animal reliefs, including lions, foxes, and birds, exhibit accurate anatomical detail, proportional limbs, and deliberate spatial composition. Repeated patterns appear across the site, yet no two pillars are identical. Variations are intentional, demonstrating both creative interpretation and mastery of form. These achievements raise questions about the cognitive and technical capabilities of the builders, suggesting that the knowledge required for such artistry was more sophisticated than conventional models of hunter-gatherer life would predict. Repeated motifs across enclosures indicate a standardized technique, suggesting that knowledge of stoneworking was carefully taught and preserved. Apprentice-like learning may have occurred at the site itself or within temporary camps nearby, where workers observed masters and practiced carving on smaller stones before attempting monumental blocks. The transmission of this skill implies a level of cultural continuity, planning, and social organization previously thought improbable for this era. Such lessons would have demanded patience, memory, and shared protocols, forming a framework in which technical knowledge could survive and evolve even without writing or formal education. Some surfaces exhibit polish and smoothing that modern experiments struggle to replicate without specialized equipment. Archaeologists attempting to recreate similar finishes using only stone tools report that the level of sheen seen on certain pillars is difficult to achieve, even with hours of labour. The combination of sanding, scraping and careful abrasion produced a tactile experience that would have conveyed skill, reverence, and perhaps even symbolic meaning to contemporary viewers. The subtlety of surface treatment transforms the pillars from mere structural supports into objects of contemplation, merging art, function, and ritual into a single harmonious creation. The combination of artistic finesse and structural precision reveals an understanding of material properties far beyond what might be expected. Builders knew how limestone fractures, how to exploit natural seams, and how to avoid catastrophic splitting while carving enormous monoliths. Certain pillars feature reliefs placed to follow natural contours, suggesting that the artisans integrated the raw stone into the design rather than imposing forms without consideration. This interplay between material and intention demonstrates a cognitive sophistication that blurs the line between technical engineering and aesthetic sensibility, highlighting a culture capable of innovation under constraints that modern observers can scarcely replicate. Every detail, from the curvature of an animal's form to the placement of reliefs, demonstrates that aesthetics and function were inseparable in these creations. Some T-shaped pillars show slight tapering at their tops, likely to reduce weight while maintaining stability, yet this structural choice is simultaneously subtle and visually harmonious. Reliefs are carefully balanced in composition, emphasizing symmetry and rhythm, guiding the viewer's eye around the pillar and across the enclosure. These considerations indicate that the builders understood not only practical mechanics, but also the impact of visual perception, demonstrating that artistry, psychology, and engineering were intertwined in their work. After all this time, the craftsmanship prompts questions about who mastered these techniques, how they were passed on, and why such knowledge appears to have vanished completely. Unlike later stoneworking traditions preserved in written records, tools, or guilds, the precise methods of Göbekli Tepe's artisans have vanished, leaving only the silent testimony of the monoliths. Scholars can study surface polish, carving sequences, and tool marks, but the human experience of creation, the transmission of skill, the apprenticeship, the nuanced hand movements, remains irretrievable. The mystery endures, a society capable of engineering, artistry, and social coordination left behind monuments whose creation is still beyond full understanding. The pillars themselves become a chronicle of lost expertise, a tangible archive of ingenuity that no longer exists in living memory. Each curve, each incision, each smooth plane carries encoded knowledge, a silent record of craftsmanship and precision that challenges the narrative of technological progress. The labour required to quarry, transport, shape, and finish these stones in a hunter-gatherer context reveals a depth of understanding, patience, and cooperation that few modern constructions can match. These pillars suggest that early humans possessed not only practical intelligence, but an aesthetic sensibility, a drive to impose order, and a capacity to execute complex tasks collectively without the benefit of agriculture or permanent settlement. Even the simplest gestures, the scraping of a flint tool, the careful polishing of a surface, the repetition of a shared motif, speak to a society attuned to precision, learning, and continuity. Every hand that touched the limestone left a subtle mark, a trace of thought, intention, and mastery. These subtle traces link generations across time, yet they also underscore what has been lost, the techniques, knowledge, and methods that once allowed humans to manipulate stone with such skill. The pillars remain as both proof of capability and testament to absence, their secrets silent yet profoundly present. Moving among the polished monoliths, tracing the faint marks of vanished hands, it becomes impossible not to wonder what knowledge was lost forever, and what other wonders humanity once held in its grasp. The sanctuary that was never meant to be seen. Some of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures lie partially buried, their entrances hidden beneath layers of earth and debris that have accumulated over more than 12,000 years. Excavations reveal that these circular formations were not designed for casual access. Rather, they seem to emerge gradually from the soil, their imposing T-shaped pillars appearing almost like guardians of a secret. The deliberate burial may have served multiple purposes: to preserve the sanctity of the space, to shield it from outsiders, or to create an aura of mystery that enhanced the spiritual weight of the enclosures. Even today, The partially concealed stones evoke an uncanny sense of secrecy, suggesting that the sanctuaries were never meant to be easily encountered. The circular formations are arranged in a manner that suggests intentional control of movement, guiding participants along narrow corridors towards central pillars. Pillars stand at precise intervals, creating pathways that funnel visitors through predetermined vantage points, controlling sightlines and interactions with the sacred space. Some enclosures feature slight elevation changes or subtle depressions, shaping the movement of anyone entering the sanctuary. The architecture itself becomes an instrument of ritual, choreographing experience in a way that transcends ordinary perception, a silent instruction manual for those trained to follow its hidden cues. Archaeologists have found almost no signs of domestic activity, no hearths, cooking remnants or permanent shelters within these sacred spaces. The absence of domestic artifacts starkly contrasts with the scale and labour invested in their construction. This lack of habitation reinforces the idea that the enclosures were built exclusively for ceremonial use. Temporary camps may have supported workers during construction, but the sanctuaries themselves were not sites of everyday life. Their emptiness magnifies their aura, emphasizing that what occurred within these walls was not routine but reserved for moments of profound significance, dictated by unseen rules and practices. Pillars and walls seem to create chambers that restrict access, separating participants from certain zones and perhaps reserving the innermost spaces for the initiated. The central pillars dominate the enclosures, surrounded by peripheral stones that may have served both symbolic and practical functions, delineating sacred from semi-sacred areas. The arrangement suggests controlled observation and restricted participation, as if only those prepared through ritual knowledge could approach the core. This spatial hierarchy implies a society that valued secrecy, where access to the deepest truths of the sanctuary was intentionally limited. The layering of stone, earth, and subtle elevation changes hints at careful concealment, as if the sanctuaries were meant to resist casual discovery. Soil accumulation over time may have been natural, but evidence indicates that some burial may have been deliberate, sealing enclosures after ceremonies or during periods of inactivity. This layered design creates an interplay of visibility and obscurity. The sanctuaries are revealed only to those who understand how to enter, and their full impact emerges only when one moves deliberately through the carefully orchestrated space. Animal reliefs, abstract symbols, and unusual carvings suggest that ritual meaning was encoded in both form and placement, intended for eyes trained to read them. Foxes, serpents, birds, and predators appear in positions that correspond to the sanctuary's spatial choreography, implying that each figure was carefully considered within the broader ceremonial context. Abstract shapes may have functioned as mnemonic devices or encoded knowledge, legible only to those initiated into the symbolic language of the site. The carvings are not mere decoration, but integral elements of the sanctuary's secretive design, enhancing both meaning and mystery. The architectural and symbolic choices imply a social hierarchy, where only select individuals may have understood the full significance of these hidden enclosures. Leadership, ritual specialists, or elders could have guided participants through ceremonies, instructing them in gesture, chant, or observation, while maintaining the sanctity of the inner space. This hierarchy would have allowed knowledge and power to concentrate in the hands of those deemed capable of interpreting the symbolic language and performing the complex rituals. The sanctuaries thus embody not just engineering skill, but a sophisticated social and spiritual system that relied on secrecy and selective access. Even today, the partially buried stones and narrow passages evoke the sense of a space deliberately kept from view, guarding its secrets across 12,000 years. Archaeologists walking among the pillars report the same impression, that one is intruding upon a deliberately hidden world, a place meant to inspire awe and obedience. The arrangement, scale, and concealment combine to suggest that these sanctuaries were never casual constructions. They were deliberately secret, protective, and controlled spaces, designed to shield knowledge and ritual from those uninitiated, leaving only the pillars as silent witnesses to ceremonies long vanished. When the sun casts its light across the hidden enclosures, it is impossible not to wonder who first stepped into the sanctuaries, what they saw, and what truths were deliberately kept from the eyes of the world. The memory carved in silence. Though they offer no words, the stones seem to speak, preserving stories that no voice has uttered for millennia. Each pillar, carved from dense limestone, carries motifs that are at once familiar and elusive. Animals poised in mid-motion, abstract geometric forms, and fragments of human figures. The repetition of shapes across enclosures creates a silent language, a system of symbols that may have recorded memory, myth, or practical knowledge. Archaeologists note that despite their apparent randomness, these carvings share a deliberate consistency, suggesting that each line and curve was executed with awareness of a broader narrative, one that transcended individual enclosures or generations. Patterns repeat across pillars and enclosures, as if each carving were a page in a long, silent manuscript. Lions, foxes, vultures, and snakes recur with astonishing frequency, often appearing in similar poses or sequences. These repetitions are not mere decoration, they seem intentional, designed to reinforce recognition and recall. The sequence of animal forms may have represented cosmological observations, seasonal cycles, or mythic tales that were shared orally but encoded permanently in stone. By replicating motifs across space, the builders created a network of visual memory, ensuring that knowledge persisted even if those who first carved the pillars passed away. Some animals appear again and again, yet their forms subtly shift, hinting at narrative variation or symbolic nuance. A fox on one pillar might crouch in a stalking position, while its counterpart in another enclosure curls as if at rest, each stance conveying a different meaning. These variations suggest that the builders were not simply copying images, but were encoding distinct episodes, lessons, or associations. Scholars have speculated that these differences could represent stages of a myth, behavioral observations, or even moral guidance. The deliberate alternation of forms underscores that the site was a repository of evolving knowledge, simultaneously fixed and flexible. Abstract symbols mingle with familiar creatures, suggesting that meaning was layered, deliberate, and perhaps esoteric. Circles, spirals, and enigmatic impressions accompany animal reliefs, their significance still debated. Some may represent celestial bodies, territorial markers, or clan insignias. Others could have been mnemonic devices to trigger recollection of oral stories or rituals. The co-presence of concrete and abstract imagery indicates a cognitive sophistication. The builders were capable of encoding multifaceted information visually, integrating observation, symbolism, and instruction in a single medium. Under close microscopic inspection, the limestone surfaces reveal faint traces of ochre and other pigments, suggesting that some carvings were once painted, adding colour to the silent messages. The subtle application of pigments may have highlighted certain motifs, creating emphasis or distinguishing between narrative elements. These enhancements would have allowed observers to read more than shape alone, introducing visual hierarchy and layers of meaning. The presence of pigment also implies that the builders understood how colour could guide attention and reinforce memory, making the carvings not only durable but also more legible to those trained to interpret them. The subtle differences between repeated motifs may have served as cues, teaching initiates to read and interpret collective knowledge. Just as modern students learn to recognize variations in letter forms or musical notation, those who participated in rituals at Göbekli Tepe may have trained to detect meaning in subtle visual shifts. Carving sequences and placement could have been part of a system to teach cosmology, mythology, or social customs, reinforcing memory through observation and engagement. In this way, the stones functioned not only as monuments, but as interactive tools for preserving and transmitting cultural understanding. The arrangement of enclosures, pillars, and reliefs may have guided participants through memory itself, forming a spatial narrative that unfolded as one moved within the site. Walking from outer circles towards central pillars, one might encounter repeated motifs in specific order, each aligned with sight lines, entrances, or light patterns. The journey through the site could have been a form of embodied learning, where physical movement reinforced cognitive recall. By intertwining architecture and symbolic content, the builders created a living archive, one that operated on multiple levels, spatial, visual, and conceptual, to preserve knowledge across time. The endurance of these silent messages hints at a cognitive sophistication, an ability to encode experience, myth, and observation in durable stone. Unlike transient oral traditions, these carvings provided permanence. They were impervious to memory lapses, ensuring continuity even if individuals failed to pass on stories verbally. Such a system implies foresight, planning, and a desire for intergenerational communication, Göbekli Tepe becomes more than a ceremonial site. It emerges as a repository of collective intelligence, a stone-bound library where each motif carries memory as carefully as words on a page. Even now, the carvings invite interpretation yet resist full understanding, leaving the past suspended between clarity and enigma. Scholars may study patterns, sequences, and repetitions, but the exact meaning remains elusive. Did these symbols recount creation myths, track seasonal changes, or encode warnings for the future? Perhaps all of these at once. Each pillar stands as both testament and puzzle, preserving information while guarding its full intent from contemporary eyes. The memory carved in silence endures, a bridge across time that invites awe, speculation, and humility before the ingenuity of its creators. Following the repeating foxes, serpents, and spirals across the stone, it becomes impossible not to wonder what stories were whispered in silence, now locked forever within the monoliths. The civilization before civilization. Göbekli Tepe challenges every assumption about the dawn of civilization, revealing monumental architecture in a world thought to be dominated by small nomadic groups. Massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing upwards of 20 tons, rise in circular enclosures that required coordinated effort, ingenuity, and forethought. The scale and complexity of these constructions predate the advent of agriculture, forcing a reconsideration of what it means to be civilized. Nomadic bands were long assumed incapable of sustaining such projects, yet the evidence here points to a society that was capable of extraordinary planning, skill, and vision, leaving stone as its silent testament. The sheer scale of construction implies social organization capable of coordinating hundreds of workers over decades, suggesting leadership, planning, and resource management far beyond what was previously imagined. Quarrying limestone, transporting it over uneven terrain, and erecting pillars in precise arrangements would have required not only labour but also strategy, supervision, and an understanding of engineering principles. Archaeologists have estimated that the labour invested in even a single enclosure may have involved dozens of people working systematically over many years. Such coordination indicates the presence of authority structures and communal purpose, hinting at social hierarchies and collective investment in shared sacred spaces. Looking closely at the terraces and trenches, it becomes clear that Göbekli Tepe's builders shaped both the stones and the land, arranging pathways, drainage, and access routes. The carefully levelled grounds, subtle embankments, and strategic positioning of enclosures indicate an understanding of topography and hydrology. Such site planning would have required knowledge of environmental conditions and the ability to coordinate construction to prevent erosion or structural instability over time. This evidence underscores the sophistication of these communities, showing that their achievements extended beyond carving and erecting pillars. They actively engineered their surroundings to sustain monumental and communal activity. Stone pillars were quarried, shaped, and erected with extraordinary precision, requiring tools, techniques, and knowledge that appear astonishingly advanced for a pre-agricultural society. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that replicating the carving styles of Göbekli Tepe demands sustained effort, understanding of stone properties, and controlled application of primitive tools. Some pillars exhibit polish, symmetry, and surface treatment that surpass expectations for the era, suggesting that the builders possessed a deep understanding of material properties and methods of achieving aesthetic and structural quality. These achievements point to expertise transmitted among specialized craftspeople, indicating that technical knowledge was organized and preserved within the society. Every carved animal, abstract symbol, and human figure hints at a shared belief system, a cultural coherence that binds the community across space and time. Predators, birds, and serpents appear repeatedly, yet always in deliberate contexts and arrangements, suggesting symbolic significance rather than mere decoration. Some carvings may encode myths, cosmological observations, or moral narratives, serving as enduring records of collective knowledge. The coherence of these motifs across multiple enclosures implies that the community shared not only labour, but also a symbolic framework that guided construction, ritual, and memory. The repetition of design elements across multiple enclosures indicates collaboration at a scale that would have necessitated communication, supervision, and communal purpose. Enclosures are linked spatially and conceptually, forming a complex network rather than isolated monuments. Decisions about layout, pillar placement, and motif selection were likely coordinated across time and among multiple groups, implying an early form of governance or social negotiation. The integration of architecture and symbolism suggests that these communities were capable of complex planning and long-term projects, challenging the idea that such feats only arose after agriculture enabled surplus labour. Evidence of construction over centuries shows a continuity of practice, suggesting that knowledge, skills, and ritual traditions were transmitted deliberately between generations. Core samples and stratigraphy indicate that certain enclosures were built, modified, and reused over long periods, with successive groups maintaining and expanding on earlier designs. This intergenerational continuity reflects both reverence for ancestral work and a deliberate effort to preserve cultural identity, memory, and technological expertise. Knowledge of carving techniques, rituals, and site layouts was carefully taught and maintained, hinting at social mechanisms designed to transmit experience without writing. These discoveries force a re-evaluation of human prehistory, suggesting that organised societies existed long before farming, cities, or written records. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that the hallmarks of civilization, labour coordination, monumental architecture, symbolic coherence, social hierarchy, and intergenerational knowledge can precede sedentary agriculture. This upends long-held assumptions about the linear progression from hunter-gatherers to farmers to complex societies. Instead, it implies that intellectual and organisational sophistication may have inspired, rather than followed, the development of agriculture, reversing the timeline of human societal evolution. Despite the absence of written texts, the very stones of Göbekli Tepe speak of a society both sophisticated and enigmatic, leaving modern observers to wonder at the minds that shaped them. Every pillar, every carving, and every arrangement conveys purpose and intelligence. The site stands as a silent record of human ingenuity, challenging our understanding of prehistory and the origins of civilization itself. The builders' intentions remain partially obscured, yet the evidence of social cohesion, shared ritual, and collective memory is undeniable, forming a legacy that reaches across 12 millennia. Sweeping through the ancient stones, the wind carries questions about a society that rose, thrived, and vanished long before history could record its name.